sent for me, Inspector?
Yes, Sergeant. A young miner named Chris Radford has disappeared under mysterious circumstances.
Now, what are the circumstances, sir?
According to his wife, he was visited last night from a stranger, a man who answers the description of Hawk Webster, the outlaw. I want you to locate young Radford, Sergeant. Find out if he's mixed up with Radford's gang.
All right, sir. I'll get on the case immediately. Come along, King.
Hawk Webster is a ruthless killer. And if he should prove to be involved in this case, he one of his most dangerous assignments. Yes, there's no telling what may happen if his search for Chris Radford should bring him up against Hawk Webster and his gang. Be sure to listen to this next exciting adventure, the Spread Eagle Raid. These feature... Till September, when we shall resume our regular Monday, Wednesday, and Friday broadcast. This is J. Michael wishing you goodbye. But the overall debt is expected to reach $116 billion a year from now. Well, Public Safety Minister Bill Blair says he assumes security authorities agreed to allow a company owned by a Chinese police force to run Canada's visa application center in Beijing. Blair says he can only make assumptions because the arrangement was put in place in 2008 under the previous Conservative government. Still, he says he's been assured personal information provided by visa applicants is secure. Blair says the information is handled according to Canada's privacy laws. No collected data is stored at the center, and all databases containing personal information are located in Canada. Well, there's a stunning development. The Canadian Armed Forces, Admiral Art MacDonald, the new Defence Staff Chief, is being investigated for misconduct only weeks after military police launched a probe into similar allegations against his predecessor, General Jonathan Vance. In reaction, Bloc Québécois leader Yves-François Blanchet says the allegations must be thoroughly and transparently investigated, resulting in recommendations for how to better deal with misconduct allegations in the military.
I expect the Army to go on with the investigations. I expect the government to say that they will make sure that it goes to the end of it. And I expect the investigation to enlighten what could be done in order to improve the situation.
In a memo to members of the force Wednesday, MacDonald made no mention of allegations against him, but did say, quote, "Our institution can no longer put the burden of change and transformation on those affected by harassment, discrimination, or any form of misconduct." Well, the head of Canada's COVID-19 vaccine distribution program says officials are preparing for what he calls the ramp-up phase. Major General Danny Fortin laid out some of the numbers in a news conference Thursday.
In total, we're expecting to receive over 10 million doses between April and June from Pfizer-BioNTech.
As part of the ramp-up, Fortin says the government will hold a rehearsal of concept on March 9th, including more than 100 participants. Residents in the country's busiest province can't yet access an online system for booking COVID-19 vaccination appointments. That's because the Ontario government wants to ensure it won't crash when it's launched. Global's Rick Zamperin reports.
Health Minister Christine Elliott says the system has been piloted, but more tests must be done to ensure it can withstand the large volume of requests expected. She says the province doesn't want to rush to failure with the system. The head of the province's vaccine task force has said that people aged 80 and older will be able to access the system when it becomes available on March 15th. A telephone booking system will also be available. Rick Zamperin, Global News.
The fireball that lit up the sky over Alberta and Saskatchewan Monday morning was a comet fragment burning up in the Earth's atmosphere. The University of Alberta was able to calculate the fireball's trajectory and velocity to learn about the origin of the meteor and revealed that it was a piece of a comet. Dr. Patrick Hill, a researcher at the U of A, says it was between a grapefruit or basketball in size and burned up immediately without leaving anything to find on the ground.
It's most likely that there won't be any fragments on the ground. We were able to determine the altitude at which it finished its track. And that was about 46 kilometers off the ground. But because this was so fast and energetic, it disintegrated in the atmosphere.
The fireball was traveling 220,000 kilometers per hour when it entered the atmosphere. To sports, in the NHL, the Jets beat the Habs 6-3, the Senators walked over the Flames 6-1, and the Red Wings beat the Predators 5-2. From the Global News Desk, I'm Darren Bolins.
Oh my God. Oh crap. There it is.
Your contribution to the COVID kitchen party.
Greetings, good fairy in wintertime. Your warmth and beauty bring cheery comfort to this frigid, icicle-ridden chariot. Careful, Walter, you're fogging up the windshield.
2 years ago. It's not yet clear how much detail the report will reveal about the Crown Prince's involvement. Riyadh insists the murder was carried out by rogue agents. A BBC investigation has found that plots of illegally acquired land in the Amazon rainforest are being offered for sale on social media. João Fellet sent this report from the Brazilian state of Rondônia.
Our investigation found hundreds of people using Facebook to sell land that had been illegally occupied and had no title deeds. One plot inside the protected Uruewawa Reserve was being offered for sale by a group which the federal police described as a criminal organization that invaded, occupied, and sold land. The buyers often convert the land to pasture for rearing cattle, clearing and selling the timber on it. Many share President Jair Bolsonaro's view that rainforest development can improve their lives. Facebook says their policies require buyers and sellers to comply with laws and regulations.
A group of Russian diplomats had to push a railway cart carrying their children and belongings to leave North Korea this week because of Pyongyang's strict anti-coronavirus measures. Pictures were published online showing the 8 diplomats and their families loading luggage onto the cart before traveling more than a kilometer into Russia. North Korea's closed its borders to prevent the spread of COVID-19. BBC News.
Welcome to Hard Talk on the BBC World Service with me, Stephen Sacker. My guest today is arguably one of the most important figures in global public health today. Seth Berkley is CEO of Gavi, the Global Vaccine Alliance, which over 2 decades has helped vaccinate close to 1 billion children in the world's poorest countries and thereby saved millions.
Permis de gagner du temps. Or, ce temps est précieux car chaque jour, nous avons un peu plus de personnes vaccinées.
Et puis ailleurs dans la conférence de presse, on entend Jean Castex dire qu'il faut tout faire pour retarder le confinement, retarder et non pas éviter.
Est-ce que c'est un lapsus révélateur, comme on dit Sophie Darvinel?
C'est au moins le signe d'une certaine cohérence dans la politique qui est menée par l'exécutif et par le gouvernement, depuis le refus par Emmanuel Macron de reconfiner, malgré les propositions faites par les propositions, voire pressantes, par les scientifiques.
Un choix politique en tout cas.
Un choix politique. Et là, ils poursuivent sur ce choix-là, qui est de dire, on va faire d'abord du cas par cas, territoire par territoire, dans les 20 départements concernés, mais aussi ailleurs. Et puis surtout, on va vraiment essayer d'aller jusqu'au bout de ce choix-là, en pariant sur la vaccination, qui de fait est quand même un horizon, à peu près le seul horizon positif en ce moment. Et donc, il y a rien d'étrange dans ce choix qui a été posé. Mais la pression est de plus en plus forte avec, évidemment, les scientifiques.
Et avec la montée des nouveaux variants, Jean-Baptiste Marteau, on l'a appris hier, il représente maintenant la moitié des cas en France. Est-ce que c'est ça aussi qui pousse le gouvernement à parler maintenant, à évoquer presque par un lapsus ce confinement?
Oui, c'est ce qu'on nous dit à Matignon, effectivement, et dans les couloirs des ministères, c'est vraiment tenir le plus longtemps possible avec cette stratégie locale. S'il doit y avoir des reconfinements, les avoir que le week-end et uniquement dans certaines métropoles, certains...
Right. Every political leader 100 times better than anything I could ever put on canvas. She has sold it to people all over the world. And Global Edmonton got her on the show. Unfortunately, you can't see this dog sitting beside her. He's the cutest little boy. But here's the interview between the two of them describing how this dog paints modern art masterpieces.
Hunter, a Shiba Inu, joins us now with his owner, Denise. Denise, welcome to the show.
Hi.
Thanks so much for joining us this morning. What a well-behaved, beautiful dog that paints. Nice to have you both on the show here with us.
Thank you.
So how did you first find out that Hunter could paint?
Well, he's always been a very energetic dog, and he's always really enjoyed learning new tricks and kind of always gets into enjoys doing different things. And so usually I find that with him, he needs the mental stimulation. So I find that we wanted to push him to do a little bit more, and he got really bored. So we ended up stumbling on painting.
Well, that's good. That's one of his paintings in the back there, obviously behind you.
Yeah, right there.
Oh,
right here.
That's very cool. That I should be able to do so well. Tell us about the process of hunter painting and how that works.
He actually usually picks up a little paintbrush. I dip it in paint, and then usually I find that like he will go up to the canvas, and then he'll just do his little flicks, and that's all on him. Like I've taught him how to like hold the brush, and then he goes in and like kind of like touches the brush to the canvas himself. And that's kind of how he does it.
He's very neat too. I was picturing something that might be a little bit more messy as he paints, but seems to know what he's doing. So you pick out the colors, and he chooses where to put them.
Yeah, he actually does I touch it to the paint because I mean it would just get too messy. But he likes being clean. He likes being neat. A lot of people always message us saying, "Oh, can we get like a paw stamp of his paw?" And he's actually like doesn't like it getting dirty, so we actually made a little mold of his paw to put on the paintings instead. Like we actually molded his paw and then stamped it on. But yeah, he's pretty neat in terms of neat as in interesting and neat as in tidy.
That's pretty cool. Now, of course, you know his personality a whole lot better than we do. Do his paintings reflect his personality or his moods on certain days?
He is, I would say that like we mainly do painting with him when he has a lot of energy, just because that's where we help him channel his energy too, so that he, doesn't get rowdy in the house or gets destructive in the house. But he's pretty, like his strokes do depend on his energy level. Like when he has a lot of energy, sometimes they're quick, sometimes he does little dots. Like it's really up to him. Like we don't really make him, do whatever stroke.
In the developing world, but we will see that happen. Are you prepared to call out those countries that have massively over-procured for their own populations? I'm thinking, number one, of Canada, where they have the remarkable sum of more than 350 million doses already procured and to be delivered for themselves for a population that needs actually just a fifth of that number to be fully double dosed. Are you prepared to say that that kind of over-procurement is not just selfish, it is deeply damaging to this collective effort you're talking about?
Of course, what we have to keep in mind is when the procurement was done. So when we started, we had no idea whether any of these vaccines were going to work. So the best philosophy was to build a portfolio, and we certainly espoused that philosophy to try to get as many different types of vaccines in your portfolio.
You're endorsing a strategy which, in effect, pushed up the price of vaccine, because as the Canadians, and we know the UK and the Israeli governments, they all basically took a policy of paying whatever it took to get their hands on early supplies of the vaccine. That, of course, pushed the prices up for everybody else as well. And you're saying that's okay.
Well, I didn't say that was okay. We know now that because the vaccines are working, and many vaccines now, we have, a handful of vaccines that are working. We suspect more will be licensed. There are now 800 million doses that have been procured that are over the requirements for population, with another 1.4 billion in options. And so what we're now in the process of discussing with these countries is how we can release those doses to help with this equitable allocation. And Canada is one of the leaders in this. At the G7 meeting last week, we had France, the UK talk about this, as well as the leader of the EC. So I think we are seeing some adjustments there. On the pricing point, there are two different groups that are thinking about pricing. There is not-for-profit pricing during the pandemic. A number of companies are doing that. There are also those that are tiering the price. And those that are tiering the price, they're providing significantly discounted prices for developing countries and for upper middle income countries that will allow those countries to be able to afford those products.
Let us be clear about one thing. The way the vaccine rollout is working across the world right now is costing unnecessary lives, is it not? As some countries have over-procured, and many, many other countries at the moment have absolutely no access to vaccine whatsoever, it is clear that the collective impact across the world is that more people are dying of COVID than would be the case if there was a more equitable, measured, equal distribution of vaccine across the world. Would you accept that proposition?
I would not only accept it, Stephen, but I would even give you the statistics behind it. If you took the 2 billion doses that we've agreed to procure and you distributed them among the 50 highest income countries, you would reduce deaths around 31%. If you distributed it across countries equitably, you get to a little over 60% of death reduction. So there is no question that equitable access is the right way, and that's why we're leaning in to try to make that happen.
I was then going to put to you a thought that was actually originated from Kate Elder, the senior vaccines policy advisor for Médecins Sans Frontières, who said the truth is Gavi will never truly call out vaccine nationalism because its biggest donors, like the UK government, for example, just to take one, are the most powerful members of Gavi's board. Is that actually true? Are you, in a sense, being emollient, being diplomatic, being tactful, because you don't want to upset the rich world countries whom you rely on for funding?
You know, you have to have a philosophy here. If you're just somebody who goes around just saying things and don't get anything done, I mean, that's one philosophy. Our philosophy is to try to deliver. We've delivered more than 822 million doses of vaccine to the developing countries, launched 496 new vaccines, and done that working with all the companies and with the donors to support that. We believe that is the best way to make things happen, and we'll continue to follow that philosophy.
I am not for a second taking for granted the huge difficulties that you face and that everybody faces with making this vaccine rollout work right across the world for the poor as well as the rich. But I am mindful that last year, Angela Merkel, the German chancellor, she did say to COVAX, you know what, you need to be ordering more vaccines now. She seemed to be concerned that there were not the actual practical negotiations to get the millions and millions of doses that you need. Those negotiations weren't happening early enough. Do you acknowledge that you could have been quicker?
Well, the only way to be quicker would have been to have the money quicker, because you can't order doses unless you have money. And I must say the Germans have been very generous at the G7 meeting on Friday. They announced 920 million new euros to support the COVAX facility, as did the U.S., as did other countries as well. But we started with zero money and zero deals, and we had to build up. Today, we have a vision towards 2.3 billion doses, with another billion doses that are part of our partner organization, CEPI, and we have $6.3 billion of donor funds to allow us to make those deals and purchase those doses. But again, if you want to make something happen, you need the money as well as the deals, because otherwise companies aren't going to work with you.
All right, just one other political point that interests me, and I'm not picking on Canada, but Canada's an interesting example. Canada, with this over-procurement, if we can put it that way, where they've got more than 300 million doses available for their population, they at the same time are demanding, it seems, 1 million doses to come from their participation in the COVAX program. Now, they are technically entitled to those vaccines, but they clearly don't need them. What do you, a key player in COVAX, think of Canada actually demanding vaccines from the COVAX program?
The strategy of putting COVAX together was not just to supply the 92 poorest countries, the so-called advanced market commitment countries, but also to supply upper middle income and high income countries. What was the reason for that? It was to get that solidarity, to get countries working together. And so the countries that are...
With respect, you can have solidarity without the Canadians demanding a supply of vaccine they clearly don't need and that others do.
Well, other countries have chosen to not use their contracts and ask for doses. At some point, Canada may do that, or they may donate doses, but it's not ours when they put finance in to purchase doses. On that side, they're not taking away from developing countries, because what we've done is gone and purchased vaccine on the behalf of those countries. So those can then be, if they wanted to, be donated or made available for other countries. But also we will keep our side of the bargain. And if we purchase vaccine for countries, we will go ahead and make that available.
Right. So far, we've couched this conversation in terms of the vaccines developed in the rich West. We've talked about AstraZeneca. I know you have some deals with Pfizer as well. As I understand it, you don't have any access to.
Paris et sa région, l'idée va quand même être étudiée selon le porte-parole du gouvernement. Le préfet et les autorités sanitaires ne se sont pas prononcés. Le confinement dès ce soir pour les habitants de Nice et Dunkerque, interdiction de sortir sur le littoral azuréen et dans l'agglomération du Nord, c'est valable jusqu'à lundi matin. Les plus de 65 ans vont pouvoir se faire vacciner à partir d'avril.
Satisfaite, bon week-end à l'abbé. Il a fait de la résistance pendant 5 ans, recours après recours. Cette fois, c'est fini. Un mois après son départ de la Maison-Blanche, Donald Trump a perdu la partie face à la Cour suprême. La Cour lui
It is an inspired conversation around race. And we've had a lot of different guests on, including you, from a lot of different angles, from bias to biracial children and how to talk to children and how to look at families different, how to look at ourselves different and our family lineage and how we all have this sort of jambalaya of, of geography. But I still come back to one place and I get stuck on, Shane, are you talking about this because it's Black History Month? Now, I know in my heart I'm not. I know that I made a commitment last summer to myself when I was doing the Roy Green Show, and then to myself with you when you and I were talking about George Floyd and how that inspired you to start writing a little bit differently and to create your life a little bit differently. So I know all those things, but I just wanted to bring that to presence because it's a good example of some of the things that we go through around this topic around race, that we feel like it's taboo. Oh God, don't get it wrong. And don't talk about it just to talk about it, but it's got to have purpose. And I know that we have purpose here and we'll share that shortly, but I just wanted to bring presence to that because it's very real for me. And I guess I don't know if that's okay or not. And maybe I'm looking for your affirmation in that. Are we talking about things the right way?
Well, you and I are having a conversation. So we're two individuals having a conversation, and in any conversation, there's not a right way. I think that could be where people get hung up. Now I'm a man who was born with a particular pigmentation of skin color that's distinct from yours. And I'm a person, just like you're a person.
Qui a valu ce qui vaut à Donald Trump des poursuites. Et donc, le procureur, dans le cadre de cette enquête, a demandé au président, à l'ancien président, de fournir un certain nombre de documents. Il a demandé à ses comptables et à ses banquiers ce qu'il s'était refusé de faire à une époque en disant, il s'agissait, je vous cite, il s'agit d'une demande à la fois trop large et il s'agit d'une manœuvre politique. Et donc, il a effectué des recours jusque devant la Cour suprême. La Cour suprême a dit non, et de manière très simple, il y a eu une ligne de décision en disant qu'il n'y avait pas lieu, elle rejetait la demande des avocats de Donald Trump, consistant à dire que la demande du procureur de New York était illégitime, était injustifiée et infondée. Donc, ce qui veut dire que désormais, les avocats et les comptables de Donald Trump devront fournir pas moins de 8 années de documents financiers, notamment et évidemment, notamment ces avertissements fiscaux, notamment ces déclarations fiscales.
Alors, selon la presse américaine, ce sont des millions de pages sous forme digitale ou physique qui vont être transmises au bureau du procureur. Ça signifie
326 days from the time the sequence was published to the first vaccine had a licensing from the UK authority. That is extraordinary. So we squeezed the timeline, but the critical thing is we didn't squeeze the safety part of it. What we did is we did things in parallel rather than sequentially. We worked to try to make sure that we could get the answers as soon as possible, but kept the safety going, and that's critical because we need that to make sure that things are working the way they should and that people are comfortable with it.
Right, but the truth is people do listen to politicians as well as look at the science. And when, for example, in Europe, Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, questioned the efficacy of the AstraZeneca vaccine, particularly for the over 65s, and when we saw the Germans say that they wouldn't administer it to the over 65s, and then the South African government declared that their data suggested it wasn't very effective against the new variant they were finding in South Africa, and they suspended its use. The net result of all that was that we see in different parts of the world, people are saying, I don't want the AstraZeneca vaccine. Now, that's one of the workhorse vaccines that you are supplying to many parts of the world. So what are you going to do about it?
Well, first of all, the reason people said the vaccine may not work in the elderly is because there wasn't a lot of data early on in the elderly. But now we've seen the data coming out of Scotland showing very effective levels, even in the above 80-year-olds. New data is rolling in all the time, and we have to look at it. If it turned out that it wasn't good in the elderly, then we should restrict its use. But what it's turning out to say is that it actually does work well.
Okay, all right, so you're saying the data evolves, but what do you say to those politicians who aren't really just talking about the data? They're displaying a mindset which arguably is problematic, certainly for people like you. For example, the president of Tanzania, John Magufuli, he said, vaccinations are dangerous. If the white man were able to come up with effective vaccinations, he would have found a vaccination for AIDS by now. And the Tanzanian health minister, she said a couple of weeks ago, that they have no plans to accept COVID-19 vaccines. Again, your job is to get vaccines to the people. So how do you deal with governments like that?
Well, first of all, I spent a long part of my life trying to make an AIDS vaccine, and we still don't have one. And that is absolutely true. Science is making progress slowly, but it's really tough. But of course, in the challenges, in the circumstance where you have a leader in a country that doesn't believe in science, it is a real problem. Look at what's happened in the U.S., a land that has been driven in science. It has the largest number of deaths from COVID in the world and an infection rate that ran out of control. It's not because America couldn't manage. It's because they chose to ignore the science in many parts of the world. And I think...
Hang on, no, this is so interesting. You're saying Donald Trump, of course, you're talking about Donald Trump. You're basically saying he has the lives of many thousands of Americans on his hands, on his conscience.
I think what you saw in the U.S. and what you're seeing in many other countries is, as you described it, the politicization of science and health, and that is always a real problem, particularly when you're in a life-threatening epidemic like this.
This entire conversation has basically told us that with the best will in the world and your best efforts, for the next 18 months to 2 years, the world is going to be a very unequal place. And in the next few months, we're going to see the rich world progressively pushing forward an energetic vaccination program which will reach many, many people over the next 6 months, while in the poorer world, it'll take much, much longer. You're an epidemiologist. What does patchwork quality of vaccination around this world of ours mean for our collective effort to banish COVID?
So first of all, in an ideal world, we would have liked to have had vaccines rolled out simultaneously everywhere in the world. We won't, you're absolutely right, we didn't get there. There'll be a couple of months lag before it starts in developing countries, but there will be rollout in those countries. And we have to remember that the risk patterns in those countries are different. The epidemiology of this disease is such that the elderly are particularly at risk. If you look at Japan, 32% of the population is over 65. Add healthcare workers in, you need a minimum of 40 to 50% of the population to be covered to get the high-risk groups. Go to Africa, where you see 3% of the population is over 65, and you see smaller numbers of healthcare workers. If you can get to 10 or 20% coverage of that population, you will cover the high-risk groups. Now, nobody is saying we should stop there. With the new variants, with a better understanding of epidemiology, maybe we want to get to 100% of the population. But the first thing to do is to try to get to those high-risk groups and protect them, protect the health system, stop the deaths, stop the hospitalizations. And the epidemiology is different in different parts of the world.
Yeah. Well, amen to that long-term prospect, stopping it. Seth Berkley, it's been a pleasure having you on Hard Talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
This is the BBC World Service. where musicians from around the world share their life in music.
Identity. As like a Sudanese girl, sometimes I really think about what can I talk about? Censorship.
My censorship comes from sensitivity. The story I'm telling relates to people that look like me, but we don't share the same experience.
And the world around us.
I've always just worked from my flat, so it's actually pretty normal.
I'm Eliza Shadad. I'm a Sudanese-Scottish singer-songwriter. I'll be joined by Odyssey.
There's truly a gift and a curse sometimes being an artist because we have so much access.
Guidance.
Malleable. It can move and it's fluid, and it might mean something different to me in 6 months, but it's honest.
And Kate Staples.
They just sort of look for
graduate from just being a dancer to being an actor and so on and so forth. So, I mean, that is a real piece of mentorship to show.
On most of these Columbia Network radio stations tomorrow and every Monday through Friday at 3:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And be with us again next week at this same time for another comedy episode of Our Miss Brooks. Bob Lamont speaking. CBS, Columbia Broadcasting System.
You're listening to Chin Radio AM 1540, the voice of multicultural Toronto, bringing you the latest updates on COVID-19. Stay informed, stay safe, and stay tuned to Chin Radio AM 1540.
Ladies and gentlemen, the story you are about to hear is true. The names have been changed to protect the innocent. Dragnet is brought to you by Chesterfield. For the taste you want, the mildness you want, a really refreshing smoke. Buy America's most popular two-way cigarette, Chesterfield. They satisfy millions. You're a detective sergeant. You're assigned to homicide detail. A killer's loose in your city. You don't know who he is or where to find him. You don't know who his victim will be. Your job, stop him.
That's helpful. When you step back into your community and you're able to mentor, like what's the...
A BBC investigation has found that hundreds of people are using social media to sell illegally occupied land in the Amazon rainforest. The buyers often sell the timber on these plots.
You want a button to report it and get it off Facebook. That's what you really want.
Police in Australia say they're closer to solving the mystery of a missing businesswoman after the remains of her foot were found still inside a shoe on a beach. Melissa Caddick disappeared in November, a day after police raided her Sydney home. BBC News.
Welcome to Business Daily. I'm Justin Rowlatt, and today we'll be looking at Bitcoin. Yep, people have made millions speculating on the cryptocurrency, but as the price goes up and up, so does its demand for electricity.
If Bitcoin were to be adopted as a global reserve currency, those miners will have more money than the entire US federal budget to spend on electricity. We'd have to double our global energy production for Bitcoin.
So could this be what bursts the Bitcoin bubble? That's what we'll be asking here on Business Daily from the BBC.
Bitcoin hitting another milestone again today, reaching a market cap of more than $1 trillion. Then there is this, in case you missed it, Elon Musk updating his Twitter profile, the world's richest man now investing $1.5 billion worth of his company's money in the cryptocurrency. Its price hit a record high on the news.
It broke through the $50,000 level just a short time ago. It's now up more than 70% since January 1st.
And I think we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg, to be honest. I think at 50K, things are just starting.
Where is it going? It's probably going to 100, then 150, then 200,000.
Bitcoin has been in the headlines a lot in the last month. Earlier this week, the cryptocurrency peaked at $58,000. But it's not just its price that's hit an all-time high. So has its energy footprint.
So we have a pretty comprehensive global estimate of how much energy is being used. And even that estimate ranges from 39 terawatts to 419 terawatts. And our best guess within that range is about 123 terawatts today.
That's about as much electricity as the whole of Argentina consumes. Gina Peters is a professor of economics at the University of Chicago. She's also a research fellow at Cambridge University's Center of Alternative Finance, which studies the burgeoning world of cryptocurrencies.
What drew me in initially was, as an international macroeconomist, the ability of cryptocurrencies to move across borders without being subject to the same restrictions as regular currencies. And then once I began to delve more deeply into the technology, I could see that there was actually something fundamentally new here.
What was it that was new? What was different about crypto?
Well, in a big way, it's the technology behind it, the blockchain. So if, for example, you want to move US dollars from the US into Canada, you've got to use these networks that have been formally set up by businesses or by these various central government agencies. Some of these very big systems have not been seriously updated since the 1990s, or even in some cases the 1970s, which is one of the reasons why moving these currencies are so slow and so expensive. With crypto, you can do these transactions without formally engaging in any of these large networks. That's what makes it so difficult for governments to prevent its use or to monitor its use across borders.
But while Bitcoin may be less clunky than traditional payment systems, it also uses a lot more energy. That's because it relies on a decentralized network of miners who all independently verify and record every transaction made in the currency.
Right, if you're Visa or MasterCard or American Express or any of these giant credit card companies, you can just have somebody sitting at a terminal and entering all these transactions on an Excel spreadsheet if you really wanted. And that uses as much energy as one desktop computer and doesn't use as much energy as Argentina.
So as soon as I try and sell a Bitcoin, this network of computers around the world has to kind of validate the transaction, doesn't it?
Exactly. So how do you get people to maintain this record accurately? You're essentially going to enlist people by paying them in Bitcoins if they are the first to compile and submit this record in a way that is acceptable to the system. So every 10 minutes, you have to put together this compilation of transactions and submit it. But there's a special trick to this. They have to guess a random number. And then if you're the first to do so, you get, at the moment, 6 1/4 Bitcoins, valued at $50,000 each.
So that's quite a prize. And a lot of people, as the price goes up, more and more people compete for that incredibly valuable prize. Is that right?
Exactly. But what the system does embedded in the code is it makes that number harder to guess. The more computing power is thrown at it. So if the price of Bitcoins goes up, then you will probably see more miners entering the field. So they want to get that revenue. And that's what's going to encourage them to introduce more and more powerful machines in order to guess this random number. And therefore, you will see an increase in the energy consumption.
Gina Peters. Well, here on Business Daily, we've visited quite a few Bitcoin mining operations in recent years.
This used to be a car service facility, but currently it's housing racks and racks of computer equipment.
Iceland has seen a rush of Bitcoin miners seeking to exploit the country's cheap geothermal energy.
For each day, I get maybe 3 to 4 emails or calls asking about the availability of electricity. By the end of this year, data centers in Iceland will use more electricity than all of the homes in Iceland combined.
And then there's the Republic of Georgia.
Practically, this river is our living source, so we will not risk our lives to live here.
Do you think they're going to drive you out of the valley altogether?
Yeah, there is a risk.
In the Caucasus Mountains, they're flooding entire valleys to build new hydroelectric schemes, and Bitcoin is their biggest customer.
It's consuming more electricity than, for example, big industries that Georgia has. It's beating everyone, actually.
But not all Bitcoin miners are using renewable energy sources like geothermal and hydroelectric. So how much carbon dioxide is Bitcoin now responsible for emitting into the atmosphere? Well, that depends who you ask.
So my name is Ethan Pierce. I'm the director of the Crypto Assets Institute. I'm also a partner at Borderless Ventures. So everything around enterprise blockchain, tokenized securities, decentralized finance. So I would do a lot of advising for for government organizations, large corporates, and investment funds on all these subjects.
My name is Alex de Vries. I'm the founder of Digiconomist. I've been researching Bitcoin and its blockchain for several years now, and I'm also featuring the Bitcoin Energy Consumption Index, which provides a live source of information on the amount of energy consumed by the Bitcoin network.
Ethan, can we start with you? Ethan, you've got a minute to tell us what you think about Bitcoin's role in energy consumption and the climate debate. Starting now.
So I think the interesting thing with Bitcoin is the entrepreneurs that are behind cloud computing and mining are trying to reduce their number one expense, which is electricity. And they do that by having more efficient computers, by reducing the air conditioning or things like that. So on the innovative side, we're putting data centers in places that are cool. We're pushing other entrepreneurs to create energy solutions that are more efficient, to create more efficient geothermal or wind, or be able to have storage facilities for the wind power, for example, so that whenever it's not windy, we can have that storage, those kind of things. Estimates are upwards of 50 to 70% of Bitcoin's power is renewable. The reality is that a lot of this is already 100% renewable or getting there. That's what we're trying to make happen.
Ethan, your time is up. Alex, you have a minute now to tell me what your position is on Bitcoin and climate change. Starting now, Alex, please.
I think we should first look at the nature of Bitcoin mining, because in the end, Bitcoin mining is sort of like a bit lottery, whereas miners are just making guesses to produce the next block for the Bitcoin blockchain. They're making 160 quintillion of those per second of the day non-stop, and they're inherently useless. They're computations that serve no other purpose, so they're just immediately discarded again. Right now, we're using a whole lot of energy to produce those calculations, but also the majority of that is sourced from fossil energy. The 78% mentioned by Ethan reflects the percentage of miners that have renewables in the energy mix. But Cambridge annually surveys miners, and they literally ask these miners, what percentage of your energy is actually renewable? They say only 39%. So the majority of the energy going into this network is still fossils.
I think it's very fair to take that perspective, especially given how much China is in the mix of Bitcoin mining in general. But if we look at the trend, one of the best places to get renewable energy, as well as cold environments that you don't have to then spend on air conditioning in order to cool everything down in the data center, are places that are colder. And so we're seeing the north of the US, we're seeing Canada, we're seeing Northern Europe, where more and more of these data centers are being put. So it's not perfect, but it's going in the right direction.
But your point, Ethan, is that here we've got an engine demanding low-cost energy. At the moment, the lowest cost energy often is renewable, and therefore it's encouraging the development of renewable energy. That's the point, isn't it, Alex?
Well, first of all, renewable energy projects are typically long-term energy projects. So if I want to construct a hydropower dam, it's going to take me 5 years. So it sounds like a really crazy idea to partner up with a Bitcoin miner, because you'd be able to have some amount of certainty on where the Bitcoin price is going to be in 5 years, and we don't even know where it's going to be next week. So it's a really tough partnership. And these miners are looking not just for cheap power, they're looking for consistent power. In fact, 30 to 40% of the network is estimated to be in Xinjiang in China. During the summer, when it's the wet season, they can get a lot of excess power from the rain that's falling during that period. But during the winter time, they have to run on coal in the north of China again.
But it all depends on the Bitcoin price. If the price is rising, yeah, they'll be seeking out new sources of energy. If the price collapses, then they're all going to pull out. So it's not a reliable source of finance for renewables, is it?
So I think what's interesting is that we actually are now seeing these mining centers, again, basically data centers, putting in place systems where they can switch from doing Bitcoin mining to other forms of crypto mining, or even more importantly, switching to doing AI or machine learning processing. And that provides other revenue opportunities for the people creating these systems in these data centers.
Well, right now, the Bitcoin system is estimated to consume about as much energy as half of all the data centers that power the internet, cloud services, big tech combined. But those data centers serve the majority of the global civilization. And at the same time, you can wonder with Bitcoin, how many people does that actually serve? The Bitcoin system still has very limited scalability. The system cannot process more than around 5 transactions per second. So it's really hard for the whole world to be using this system. Like, if Bitcoin were to be adopted as a global reserve currency, the Bitcoin price will probably be in the millions. That means those miners will have more money than the entire US federal budget to spend on electricity. That's going to be an amount that's We have to double our global energy production for Bitcoin.
It's very true, and that's why I don't consider Bitcoin a digital currency in most ways. Nobody's going to go spend 0.000001 Bitcoin on a Starbucks. That'll be stable coins or other topics that are not volatile. So when it comes to payments, right now you tap your phone or you use your card and you tap it. Who cares what's powering the other side of that transaction? If it's euros, dollars, or some digital magic money that just makes all of those fees disappear because we don't need to go through institutional historic legacy systems that are super expensive. And I think that's where this will go. People won't know what they're spending. They'll just know they bought something by tapping their phone and they got the thing.
Well, I definitely think we have agreement here because we do see this as a trend. The central banks are actively working on their own digital currency, so I think this is more like a matter of time. It's just that it won't be Bitcoin.
That was Alex de Vries, and before him, Ethan Pierce. So what do the world's central banks make of Bitcoin and other would-be cryptocurrency rivals?
Yeah, I'm Kenneth Rogoff. I'm a professor of economics at Harvard University, and I was in the early 2000s the chief economist at the International Monetary Fund. And I wrote a book a few years ago about the past, present, and future of money that had a lot about digital currencies and cryptocurrencies.
So quite well qualified then to talk on questions monetary.
Well, who knows?
Let's see. Does Bitcoin have any intrinsic value?
Well, yes, but the question is, what's the final use case for Bitcoin? And really, the main final uses it has are illicit activity, avoiding capital controls, tax evasion, etc. It is being used for real things at the moment. People are living in war-torn states, or they're living, say, in a Hezbollah-controlled part of Lebanon. Hezbollah is sanctioned by the U.S. government. They can't do transactions. And hard cash is being traded for Bitcoin to move money around. That's a very expensive proposition. But the fact is, it's not really used much in the legal economy now. Yes, one rich person sells it to another, but that's not a final use. And without that, it really doesn't have a long-term future.
Okay, listen, Ken, let's take a step back and let me ask you this. What is money? What's it for? What makes a useful currency?
Well, at the end of the day, people have to broadly accept it for transactions. You have to be able to pay your bills. The cost of transactions need to be very low. It needs to be stable in its value.
So I own some dollars. I know I can go to the shop and buy myself a loaf of bread or a beer or whatever I want. And I know that suddenly my money's not going to be worth this. If that's the definition of money, how effective is Bitcoin?
Well, it's not very effective. Certainly, it's not stable. The price moves around like crazy. So that makes it very hard to have transactions built around it because you don't know what it's going to be worth in a day, much less a month. And because peer-to-peer transactions where you give me some cash, I give you some Bitcoin, the government never sees that. It makes it hard to collect taxes. It makes it hard to enforce laws. And for that reason, governments are very reluctant to give it broad use in normal transactions. Elon Musk may say that you can buy Tesla with it, but you're going to need to report the transaction, do all the things that Bitcoin owners want to avoid. But if it did burst into more common use, that all the central banks are thinking about it. Every central bank, every regulator is attuned to this. You can look at U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen's comments on this.
I don't think that Bitcoin is widely used as a transaction mechanism. To the extent it's used, I fear it's often for illicit finance. It's an extremely inefficient way of conducting transactions, and the amount of energy that's consumed in processing those transactions is staggering.
So, I mean, what you're describing is something that's a pretty rubbish currency by the standards you've set. What on earth is driving this kind of huge surge in Bitcoin value?
I mean, I have trouble understanding why the price should be so high. You have to accept it as a piece of modern art almost, and I don't say I understand much about the pricing of modern art. I could not begin to tell you why someone who's still living can sell paintings for $50 million when they seem to be able to produce unlimited amounts of them. I have no idea. There are a lot of things we economists don't understand. I can imagine maybe there'll be some future Star Trek convention in the year 2100 where people want a Leonard Nimoy signed picture and they'll trade Bitcoin for it. I really don't know.
No, fair enough. If this is a bubble, it's going to eventually burst, isn't it?
That's my guess, but I really couldn't tell you when.
Ken Rogoff there. Well, Bitcoin's run may not have come to an end quite yet, but ours has for today. The producer was Lawrence Knight. We'll be back at the usual time on Monday for a week of programs looking at the mental health impact of the coronavirus lockdowns.
Now, here on the BBC World Service Witness History, with me, Louise Hidalgo. Today, I'm bringing you the story of a 1990s campaign that led to a landmark international treaty banning anti-personnel landmines. The treaty has saved the lives of hundreds of thousands of people around the world and protected hundreds of thousands more from often life-changing injuries. Both the campaign and the woman who led it were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for their work. On March the 1st, 1999, the Ottawa Treaty banning the production, use, export and stockpiling of anti-personnel landmines became international law.
We seek the universal adherence to this treaty. In order to be completely effective, all nations must sign, all nations must ratify, all nations must destroy their stocks.
Veteran American activist Jody Williams had led the campaign that resulted in the treaty, and for the first time had managed to get NGOs sitting alongside governments and international organizations to negotiate it. Jody says it was only possible because people had at last realized the human cost of these weapons.
When peace comes, other weapons leave with the soldiers. Landmines stay wherever they have been placed. Everyone who is either maimed or killed by them is a civilian. A combatant could place a landmine that could kill his grandson or great-grandson. They last that long in the ground.
All it takes is one false step in a minefield. It happened to me one day.
Armies had used mines for decades, but with the Cold War, the mines had become more sophisticated and indiscriminate. Before the treaty, 20,000 people, mostly civilians, were killed or maimed by landmines every year.
It becomes part of your life. It is behind your house. Every day you go out and you're tiptoeing and not knowing.
By the early 1990s, when Jody Williams became involved, it was estimated there were maybe 100 million uncleared mines in 64 countries, and they claim more victims than nuclear and chemical weapons combined. Jody had cut her teeth as an activist in college, protesting against the Vietnam War. Later, she became an aid worker during the Civil War in El Salvador. Jody, let's go to 1991. The war in El Salvador was ending, and you were looking for a new challenge, weren't you?
Yeah.
Why landmines?
Two organizations weaseled me into the office of one of them, Vietnam Vets of America Foundation, and the other one was Medico International from Germany. They were involved in a project in Cambodia training ex-combatants who were amputees themselves to make prosthetic devices. And they said that it was like putting Band-Aid on a gaping wound. You really had to do something to address the fundamental problem, and that was the use of landmines. And I was like, why am I here? Why are they yammering on about landmines? And at some point they said, we need a campaign to ban them, and we think you'd be good at it.
What did you think? Did you say yes straight away?
They just wouldn't relent. And it only took a couple of minutes of explaining to me the difference between a landmine and other weapons. And I said, yes, I would give it a shot.
They decided to concentrate on anti-personnel landmines, not anti-tank mines. Anti-personnel mines are triggered by people, civilians. Jody had never led a campaign like this before, but she was good at organizing and at straight talking.
If you don't like what I'm saying, I'm really sorry, but I tell you what I really believe.
So how did you go about creating an international campaign like that?
It seemed logical you reach out to organizations that in some way are touched by landmines, their work. For example, I started talking to UNICEF. You know, UNICEF deals with children and their families, right? And they work everywhere. So I went and met with the head of UNICEF at that time. He had his office join the campaign. He even sponsored, I think, our second international conference.
A worldwide battle against landmines came to the nation's capital today.
Within 5 years, a movement that had begun with just Jody working alone at home and those two small founding organizations had become an international movement involving more than 1,300 groups in over 90 countries. And with it, the pressure on governments grew. A push for the U.S. to sign an international treaty to ban deadly landmines. There were protests, letter-writing campaigns, a lot of lobbying. The International Committee of the Red Cross launched the first advertising campaign in history, calling on the international community to act.
You wouldn't even kill the trees. That's what we got to do. We got to play sumac.
Too, the early 1990s,
2 minutes in, we're already done with your landmine.
Countries where proxy wars were being fought between USSR and the US suddenly opened up, and people were so shocked when they got to Cambodia or Afghanistan or Mozambique. The journalists wrote outstanding stories that just helped build our momentum.
It may not look it, but this is some of the deadliest ground in the world. During the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s, the opposing armies buried some 26 million landmines along their common border.
This is one of the most heavily landmined areas in the world. The screams and cries of Cambodia are coming forward to demand action.
And we also had an amazing group of landmine survivors who joined the campaign specifically to talk about what had happened to them and why it shouldn't happen to anyone else. And that really touched people.
But ultimately, it was governments, not the public, who'd have to agree a ban. And that would mean convincing their militaries, many of whom saw a ban on landmines as the start of a slippery slope to bans on other weapons.
First 2 or 3 years.
Jody recalls one encounter in particular with a military officer who was escorting them to a meeting at the US State Department.
He turned around and he hissed, "We will never sign this treaty that you created."
And they won't.
The turning point in the campaign came in 1996. That year, negotiations on a United Nations Treaty on Conventional Weapons had failed to agree a hoped-for ban on landmines. But then Jody and fellow campaigner Steve Goose were told Canada was willing to help.
A Canadian diplomat came up to Steve Goose and myself and said, Canada wants to host a ban conference. Canada had been following the U.S. position in lockstep.
We heard you're trying to get a treaty together.
And I said, what if they're trying to infiltrate us somehow and make sure a ban never happens? And he rightfully said, well, we don't have a lot of other options.
The conference did take place in Ottawa in October 1996, and at the end of it, Canada's Foreign Minister Lloyd Axworthy stunned those present by issuing an ultimatum.
There were about 50 governments at the conference, and he took a deep breath and he said, you keep talking about banning landmines, but that's not enough. Canada
exports asbestos, among other things, weapons to Saudi Arabia. So we let people starve here and freeze to death in the street.
Welcome to Environment Canada's Weather Service. Bienvenue au service météorologique d'Environnement Canada. Pour service, press 1. Pour le service en français, faites le 2. Welcome to Environment Canada's Weather Service. Bienvenue au service météorologique d'Environnement Canada. Pour service, press 1. Pour le service en français, faites le 2.
Canadian Weather Service. The weather out there was weather. I don't know. Did you call the government? Yeah. Oh, he switched to French. Useless. Fucking useless. Let's try this again.
Welcome to Environment Canada's Weather Service. Service météorologique d'Environnement Canada. For English, press 1. Faites le 2. For the City of Toronto, press 1. For York Durham, press 2. For Dufferin Innisfil, press 3. For Halton Peel, press 4. For Niagara, press 5. For the City of Toronto, press 1. For York Durham,
And how does my telephone affect your weird little obsession with my eyes being closed, Officer? Obviously, a diddler. What is your fucking issue? I can see the screen. I can see the screen from every fucking inch of this room. I can see the screen. Yeah, your connection is unstable. What happened to the sound, dumbass? Fuck's sakes. These creative people on the planet are sex offenders. Do the same thing this hour we did last hour. Let's show him pictures of himself with his eyes closed. You're tapping on an app on a phone. You're not creative, bro. You're copying and pasting codes. Apparently, we're left there for you to get caught with. What blows my mind is how many hours straight you will watch and keep that shit up. If I don't like somebody, I don't watch them. If I can't stand call me frog nigger fuck shit, I don't tune into it. Oh, you're mad. You're mad.
Dragnet.
Keep it up. On and on.
Crime. For the next 30 minutes in cooperation with the Los Angeles Police Department, you will travel step by step on the side of the...
Holy shit, man. Your fucking brain doesn't work for shit, though.
Level. We all know that the new variants spread more quickly than the old variants.
Something I hate.
We need the next few weeks to understand how the variants are actually changing the pandemic, especially with schools open. We also need time to roll out vaccines.
The group says vaccinating high-risk communities and older people will drive down hospitalizations and death. While staying in Ontario, where a transcript is out on the 4.5 hours of testimony given by the province's Chief Medical Officer of Health on long-term care, Dr. Dave.
Airline groups, IAG, says it made a loss of more than $8 billion last year. The group, which owns British Airways and Iberia of Spain, saw its revenue from passengers fall by 3/4 because of the pandemic. South Korea has begun its coronavirus vaccination program. More than 5,000 healthcare workers and patients at long-term care facilities have been receiving locally produced AstraZeneca jabs. All recipients are under 65, pending further data on the vaccine's suitability for older people. Queen Elizabeth has urged people worried about getting a coronavirus vaccination to think of others before themselves. She made the comments in a video call with British health officials.
I've had lots of letters from people who've been very surprised by how easy it was to get the vaccine. It is obviously difficult for people who've never had a vaccine because they ought to think about other people rather than
anal
themselves.
sex doesn't count, so
The
it's all good. You
94-year-old
don't need
monarch
it.
has had the vaccine herself. World news from the BBC.
Stop
A
telling me it's
BBC
my grandmother.
investigation has found that hundreds of people are using social media to sell illegally occupied land in the Amazon rainforest. The buyers often sell timber from the plots and then convert the land to pasture for rearing cattle. In the last
We're missing the The problem is, eyes closed
India
doesn't mean
says it's
anything. What does
discussed with
that mean
China
in
the
an
further
emoji?
disengagement
Closed
of
eyes.
troops
What's
along
that
their
mean?
joint disputed border.
You're
In a
finger
lengthy
painting with your
telephone
fucking
conversation,
iPad.
two foreign
The
ministers
app
addressed the issue
shuts my
of
eyes. Then
remaining
what?
friction
What's
points in
the
eastern
message?
Ladakh. Both sides have just completed a withdrawal of troops in the Pangong Lake area. A group of Russian diplomats had to push a railway cart carrying their children and belongings for more than a kilometre to leave North Korea this week because of Pyongyang's strict anti-coronavirus measures. Laura Bicker reports from Seoul.
Photos and video showed the group of 8 diplomats and their families, including a child as young as 3, loading luggage onto a trolley, then pushing it along the train tracks into Russia. Early last year, North Korea has not allowed any of its trains or wagons to enter or leave the country, and extra troops have been sent to border areas with orders to block any possible transmission of the virus. The measures left the Russian diplomats no choice but to find this rather unusual transport home. The embassy's third secretary acted as the trolley's engine and pushed it for more than a kilometre across the railway bridge over the Tumen River.
Police in Australia say they're closer to solving the mystery of a missing businesswoman after the remains of her foot were found still inside a shoe on a beach. Melissa Caddick disappeared in November, a day after police raided her Sydney home. She was suspected of stealing tens of millions of dollars from dozens of clients. BBC News.
Do you think you're going to find... Do you know how many people that could have been?
Hello and welcome to Tech Tent, your weekly guide to all the hottest news and trends from the technology world. I'm Rory Catlin-Jones, and this week in Australia, it's now the law. Tech giants like Facebook and Google must now pay for news content. So should other governments go down the same path? We hear 2 diverging views. Ever wondered what happened to all the e-waste in redundant gadgets? An inventor tells us how water-soluble circuit boards could be the answer. And influencers, people made famous by Instagram and other platforms,
you realize they are water soluble now.
But have they been a lifeline for small businesses? Joining me this week is BBC technology reporter Zoe Kleiman. Hi Zoe, what's been keeping you busy?
Well, I'm getting a crash course in Roblox thanks to my children. As a treat from homeschool, they're now playing Roblox and I'm having to frantically scramble to keep up with them.
And you've also been talking to lots of those influencers, and we'll hear more about that later. Here's a taste of what's coming up.
The Internet of Things is meaning that even more of these products are ending up in landfill, and the waste generation is just becoming out of control.
It feels really great when the brand comes back to you and goes, the orders are just flying off the shelf here, Donna. Thanks so much for all your work and your creativity. You think, great, I've done a really good job.
Now, it's called the News Media Bargaining Code, and when it was made law in Australia this week, it sent shockwaves around the world. Weeks of frenzied debate about the code, which was designed to make tech giants pay for news content, had seen Google threaten to pull its search engine from Australia, and then Facebook go ahead with a move to remove all Australian news. But each of them, in turn, backed down and started talks with news organisations about paying them.
What exactly?
The Australian law has been opposed even by some fierce critics of the tech giants. So, should other countries now follow its lead? We're going to hear 2 opposing views. First, the technology commentator Stephanie Hare explains why other governments should take inspiration.
Well, I think every country around the world, and certainly every liberal democracy, recognizes the importance of the press.
Democratic republics
and we know that the journalism business model in recent years, I'd say in the past sort of 2-3 decades, has really struggled with the online transition and lost a lot of money. We've seen a lot of journalists get sacked. So the content value has shifted to online. That's where advertising has gone. And what countries are wanting to do is to get
don't quit your day job. The streets each up and make the times real hard. That's why I got all these tattooed scars. Chilling in the TV bars, rolling in the fancy cars, sweating out the superstars. Yeah, I look like a model. B-I-O-R. Money in the rubber band, stack it till you can't park. Yeah, I got the trade powers, got a real loud bar. I do my dirt in the dirt, fucking through the pod. I got so many quarters, AKs, SKs, long range, short range, red state, no brain. Killing my kitty, motherfucker, crime pays. Yeah, I'm trying to get the paper, I'm just trying to get rich. We do it for the big face, dead presidents. And I Lamborghini dreams, still got Mercedes Benz. And yes, I'm a boss, just before I win. You gotta get it how you live when life is like this. And yes, I need 36, the whole fucking brick.
What up, Officer Obvious? Keep it up. That back and forth shit's the best one. Why don't you skip to whatever track you want to hear, dumbass? How long are you going to hold that up for?
Whatever I want, whatever I do, whatever I say.
Look straight at the screen. At no point is my head moving, but I'm watching my head jerk in different directions and my eyes are moving and fluttering shit.
Stay strong. When we lock a gunshot, cease and stop. When the crooked cops stop being crooked cops. When we lock a gunshot, cease and stop. When the crooked cops stop being crooked cops. When we lock a gunshot, cease and stop. When the crooked cops stop
What you did to these is wrong. You copy white people again. You keep asking them how you should do native stuff. Hey, Mr. Whiteman, teach me how to be First Nations. Fucking idiot bootlickers. Not directly. Keep it up and down, up and down. Keep it up. So should I bother showing people? Like we've been through this for a year now. It's the same fucking idiot for a year. So yeah, not directly up in them. Yes, you are, because the only reason there's a hole in these pants because they stole the last 3 sets of clothes they stole from me. Are you fucking done? This is up and down the slow-mo chomo. You won't fucking cut it out. I'm gonna wait till he's done because I'm getting sick of watching me jerk back and forth. Yeah, do it again. Do it again. Keep it up. Once he hits a certain number of fucking dead fucking hits, it fucking blocks his IP for a minute. Eventually he gets bored and fucks off, or the sound shuts off, or the machine shuts off. So fucking do it or don't. Fuck off. Nobody gives a fuck about you. So as you can see, I lit the joint, so all hell has to fucking break loose. It's literally every fucking half second. Up, down. Up, down. I can't show you because it keeps freezing. So you can see that much that my fucking viewfinder keeps freezing. Up, down, up, down. Keep it up. Keep it up. Keep it up. You like raping children and you're mad that the world doesn't agree with you. You're mad that the world doesn't agree with you. You're going to fight the righteous fight. You don't like the negative fucking stereotypes of pedophiles. So you're going to attack anybody and everybody you can find, which is the high profile fucking people. Don't you think we make it easy to find us for a reason, you fucking retard? So you're fucking done. No. Well, you fucked up the Ethernet, so I don't know how you did that. All you do is break stuff. You're not good at what you do. I want you to do this more often. So if I said up, down every time, it'd be fucking retarded. He's done this 4 times since the last time I pointed it out. It's an angry pedophile, an angry child pornographer, flipping the fuck out with the only weapons he has, which is some cut and paste codes they got off the dark web. And they've been doing this for what, 4 or 5 months now? Wow. They don't like French, they don't like niggers, they don't like chinks, they don't like commies. And they're going to tell me I'm all these things too. And if I don't give a fuck about them, they will harass me till I do. I don't give a fuck. You're the most heat score people on the planet. I'm waving that pedophile flag. I want the whole world to see it, stupid. And the Puritans, anti-drug. They're the good pedophiles. Keep your kids off drugs, right? Keep showing me my eyes closed. I don't know what that's supposed to mean. You touch people when they're sleeping? Is that what that means? You're fantasizing about me with my eyes closed or something? What's it mean? I don't know what you're referring to. If I threaten you, you're going to know what it is. Your messages to me never make sense. You're constantly sending You're so frustrated that I won't pick up. Keep it up. That's 3 times. That's 3 times in about half a second.
It's a concept. It's a narrative.
You're so frustrated that I won't pick it up and figure out what it means. You're leaving comments on the fucking videos. It's pro-pedophilia propaganda. Angry, but you still won't say what it means. Eyes closed. What's that mean? Walk up to somebody randomly and say, eyes closed. What the fuck are you talking about? It doesn't mean anything. It means something in your fucking schizophrenic, psychopathic, sociopathic head.
Oh Lord, me tell ya. But when niggas ain't close, so you gotta talk to these niggas. Hail Mary, full of grace, smack the bitch in the face. Hail Mary, full of grace, smack the bitch in the face. Name another rapper that's as bad as bars. In Toronto making hits like I was Alamar. Sauteed chicken, green peppers at the salad bar. Cops still profile niggas without the avatar. Had 20 niggas, I'm last man standing. My bitch on the runway like a plane landing. It's awesome, shoot up the church like Charleston. Before we listen to Robin Banks, we fucked the Carlton. My mom's brother had that weight, we called him Uncle Phil. Like you could be as fresh as a prince, but I had that fucking will. I'm in a muscle car, shorty get a foreign. Till I'm in a cut, cause some fucking party scoring. Niggas that was worried, or for whores that were whoring. If I put my 50 cents in it, rains when it's pouring. Like none of you niggas fucking with me. Dollars, my young boy gon' smoke it for 150. I'm trying to lead this world with 200 pick me. If it's soldiers with swords, I got 300 with me. Did you say your prayers for the day yet? Niggas getting smoked and had to take a rain check. Hail Mary, full of grace, smack the bitch in the face. Hail Mary, full of grace, smack the bitch in the face. Like bitch, you're dead wrong. I know that they ain't about that. We was cutting beef up, mad cows and all that. Can't tell you about the drama that was last night, but I got the compact, beam with the flashlight. I know they hate to see me like the gaslight. Me versus them, well that's a landslide. I swear they rooting for the feds to win. A man got smoked, then his homie ran to Edmonton. If I die, don't call my next of kin. Better act like cartel or move like you a Mexican. You ain't even smell the shit that you was stepping in. You can ask Kiss, former Rough Rider president. If they hitting, then we hitting back like Chano. We grew up with cow foot and chicken back, y'all know. No love for farmers or a licky back. Big gun, pussy guaranteed, get lick with that. My papa said I had no brat ups. I stay giving niggas autopsies. Hey, I'm Mary, full of grace. Smack the bitch in the face. Hey, I'm Mary, full of grace. Smack the bitch in the face.
New York niggas is hard niggas. Niggas niggas smell that. Niggas smell that around the corner.
When it comes to money, I'm here for these screws. My niggas rob niggas, then they bring me their jewels. I used to ask God for things, but I would never get it. Now I just steal it and ask God for forgiveness. You worry about the wrong man, I'm the shooter. Give a man an inch, and he think he the ruler. There's no I in team, but there is a me. The American dream to believe it, you gotta be a slave. I know it's bad, but I'm high anyway. Eat healthy, stay fit, die anyway. Stay talking, God, gotta pray, but I don't get it. Cause when God talk back to me, they say I'm just a planet. I don't talk shit, I pull up pistols. I'm like a ventriloquist, you never see my lips move. I'm throwing money up, never get skinny bitch. Box fat, can even go skinny dipping. I started with nothing and still had most of it. I'm pulling out hammers like jumping Jehoshaphat. I can't remember the last time I forgot something. This guns is decoration, nigga, so stop frontin'. It's sticky fingers, I'm maniac depressive. I'm passive aggressive. You better spread the message. You know who the best is. You better have your best. I'm good, big, black, and ugly. I call that bitch precious. I sweat on my nose. They say that I'm an evil bro. I'm a warlock. I see things and dream in color. You think it can't happen till you got flesh. But you won't make it right. Or believe me, 3 left.
We keep it clean with the whips, clean them with the guns. Stacks on 100, point me hit the ones. Kush stove sticky, niggas smoke guns. This is grown man B.I. They acting like his sons. I don't give a shit, give a shit. Them niggas, we don't give a shit, give a shit. Tone nigga, bro, I don't give a shit, give a shit. Them niggas, we don't give a shit, give a shit.
I know the hood like I came back so hard. Such a night. Must be an act of God. Yo, stick your finger back, and he grind me again with that double barrel shotgun like Siamese twins. It's always the nigga with the biggest mouth that can fuck first. Not as bad as people say, believe me, or much worse. Can't believe they can't see through how you be frontin'. You know the cost of anything, but you value nothing. And even if a bitch got a fuck to make you use a mother nature can't even fuck all the time taking. I heard everybody out my hotter. I believe in horoscopes, nigga, my signs is violent. Listen, nigga, I'll make a deal with you. Stop lying on me, or I'll start telling the truth about you. About my hip-hop niggas, and my hip-hop bitches, think bitches back now it's all for 2 wishes. And I'ma keep grinding till they close the curtain. I don't know what makes you so whack. Nigga, it's burn, nigga, it's burn. I carry so much heat, you think it was arrested. Violence ain't the answer, you need to rephrase the question. Yeah, I was born to be a pessimist. Even my blood type is B-type negative. Refuse to go quietly into the night. Every day like it should last, but they live it right.
We keep it clean with the whips, clean them with the guns. Stacks on 100, point me hit the ones. Kush stove sticky, niggas smoke guns. This is grown man B.I. They acting like his sons. I don't give a shit, give a shit. Them niggas, we don't give a shit, give a shit. Tone nigga, bro, I don't give a shit, give a shit. Them niggas, we don't give a shit, give a shit. Live report.
Jump in the water, just be that flow. Don't go against that flow. Just be that flow, just be that flow. Jump in that water, just be that flow. Don't go against that flow. Just be that flow, just jump in that water. Be that flow, just be that flow. Jump in that water.
Be that flow, just be that flow. Don't go against it, God. Just be that flow, jump in that water. Yeah. Be that flow, just be that flow. Be that flow, jump in that water. Be that flow, just be that flow. Yeah. Don't go against it, be that flow. Just be that flow. Don't go against it, dog. Be that flow. Jump in that water, be that flow.
Slice a piece up in the Dutch pot. Curry chicken on the stove top. Shout out niggas from the stove top. Niggas talk but send a gunshots.
I fly Aki sauce from my picture slip. The place run down, but it's shifting good. Shout out niggas at a driftwood. The shit's way beyond crip blood.
Toronto born and raised. Toronto born and raised. They was never ready. Every single day you would be amazed. Living how we live, young niggas grinding stuck up in a maze. Told my nigga Charlie we can get this money, make it different ways.
We don't call it no shit, we ain't call it no bitch. But I got a full clip and I bet it'll rip. Cause you better a bit, and they get it with kids. You know that I have niggas. Lift them up how I bench niggas. Better get back on that defense, nigga. But it's gonna ride if a stench, nigga. I guess we on the offense.
Charlie like Jordan, Scottie Pippen. Better listen on a mission, wishing, hoping that we find a way to beat the competition.
Niggas snitching, cotton picking, walk with bitches. Talk is different, you know, slipping back for business. Wait, let me slow it down. Still full circle, I go around.
Never thought my city was a murder town. Rob like a dungeon dragon. Ran from the cops and my pants were hanging. Used to do dirt in a station wagon. Getting locked up in the station flagging.
03, I got to raise the magnum. Bringing out the beast like a Hugh Jackman. Join the team like some new draftsmen. To get the rope like how they do in Hangman. Jump in the water. Just be that flow. Don't go against that flow. Just be that flow. Just be that flow. Jump in that water. Just be that flow. Don't go against that flow. Just be that flow. Just jump in that water. Yeah. Be that flow. Just be that flow. Jump in that water. Be that flow. Just be that flow. Don't go against it, God. Just be that flow. Jump in that water. Yeah. Be that flow. Just be that flow. Just be that flow. Jump in that water. Be that flow. Just be that flow. Yeah. Don't go against it. Be that flow. Just be that flow. Don't go against it, dog. Be that flow. Jump in that water. Be that flow.
Sit your little bitch ass down, nigga.
You can't spell ball without the AR. Vote me for mayor. Taking helicopters down with a little laser. And the cannon, I'm holding bigger than fucking mega. Yaga, the liquor put the shot to make it stagger. For my little brother, it's like he loves my partners. Real bad boy, baby, God box. With this empire, it's nothing like Ross. These are enemy lines, nobody can cross. 100 rappers in an abandoned whip. Full clips like a bitch's wig stitching. Murder gang sick shit. Got me reading the words as of my victim lip syncs. Get your same murders. Niggas know I'm running through the streets with beef. Like the hamburger with the burner. No food surfing. Yeah, still M3G repping. Sitting in the vehicle, plotting on people. Taking your prized possession like a reaper. Kneeling with the hammer. Call it Tim Tebow. Holding on the hammer. Call it Home Depot. Everything I'm doing is illegal. Everything I'm doing is illegal. Kneeling with the hammer. Call it Tim Tebow. Holding on the hammer. Call it Home Depot. I'm at the bar ordering a Heineken. Waiting for the street to fall back. I was timing it. Fronting them with double set up. Check me run 9 and 10. MGK and Wild Boy. Nigga, we some wild men. About to get alive again. Rifles like the Irishman. Used to come in Benjamin. But Charlie was a rider man. Nigga try to end me for the money. Call a fireman to put my fucking flame up. Go ahead and try it then. But all means do you. I'm creeping through the field shop of Zulu. Cruising in the Subaru. Murder gang croak on doors and get for bubbles. You lose. Tell you what kind of like cool shows. Militia Junior is easy to hire shooters to whack you. Right now, I'm a smack. Don't even attempt, I won't gap you. Really, I don't have to. Slap the kid so hard, I put a wonder, call him Matthew. Subliminal. Murder gang squad in effect. I set it up to win no box. You block to follow my dialect. My number, you ain't dial yet. That judge ain't fry yet. By the end of this track, a motherfucker buying it. That bitch holds gauges and a couple 45s in it. it. Catch a couple cases, but I'll beat him if I'm hiding it. In the L spot, nigga known for the kill shot, cause I'm the nigga that shot Jack and chill out the hilltop. Too. Lil Red Riding Hood was riding hood, the song blew her up now. She ain't riding through the hood. And Woody Woodpecker was a fag while Batman got checks the panties off his pants. Spidey was a swinger. Wolverine is a nigga that's obvious that I ain't gotta mention Master Splinter. When I master shatter in my mouth, my temporal blast for cheddar. Trying to make out is better. Yeah, sitting in the vehicle, plotting on people. Taking your prized possession like a reaper. Kneeling with the hammer, call it Tim Tebow. Holding on the hammer, call it Home Depot. Everything I'm doing is illegal. Everything I'm doing is illegal. Kneeling with the hammer, call it Tim Tebow. Holding on the hammer, call it Home Depot.
I don't know who's in charge of Canada anymore. Justin's driving. Dougie's paying for it, and John Tory's waiting for the bus. So, two different military commanders, John. The two retired ones are running the vaccine thing. Everything these people touch turns to shit. The Governor General's gone. The Governor General, all these military commanders, and the Prime Minister are under investigation for various reasons. It's not one thing. No, they've all got their own. There's these overlapping circles of corruption. The only newspaper I can find in print anymore is in French. The blasted Anglo bastards. Shorty got pneumonia, while she got the bird flu.
Yeah.
Communications screw-ups at Halibut First Nation. Welcome to Mi'kmaq Matters, a podcast about the Mi'kmaq people and the Halibut First Nation.
I hope you have your offerings close.
Nah, they couldn't just start SICKLY, no?
Free up the youth now,
See?
Free Kilo, free John,
See? Merch the YG.
OG.
Court, nigga.
Go hard,
like Logan. Body's DBS. All black on my clothing. X-Men, that's how we rolled in. Put it to you, have you drunken like the rose in. But you in your mouth, taking out your gold in. Put it to your next man, now his neck frozen. Fuck, now I'm dipping in the stolen, gripping in, I'm scoping. I see him leave him open. Big large gun, there's no poking. Pop out the big, your head's open. Now you're floating. The body stays stiff in the ocean. Cruising with some deadly fish, so your body ain't exposing. DBS, I was chosen. So I hunt for the golden. I make blocks, don't care if it's stolen. But Bob, if you owe him. The black flag, I was holding. 5 DB, we rolled in. 10 guns, we holding. From 2 each, so we going. A headshot, so you gon' spin. Back.
Niggas not tryna see me with the DBS, cause you know the niggas I'm with, get it poppin'. Strap on my waist, you can tell by how I'm walking. Act left, you can lie right in the coffin. I remember, I almost got caught slipping shit, had me tripping. On the truck I'm sitting, call it camping. My niggas had me snapping. Now I'm sitting here, plotting on my enemy. I get my own strap, niggas didn't friend for me. A fat blunt and some Hennessy. Just to level me, this beat sounds heartfelt. Big bullets make the biggest niggas melt early. That's a bomb, nigga.
Up top, nigga, I'm wide up. Every nigga I roll with call
The beats so mad in the caliber. Deal with
It says, wanted. Young man familiar with care and repair of mining tools and equipment. Good pay, but must leave city.
Bob, that's right in your line. Where do you apply for the job?
There's no address, just a box number. I'll have to write a letter of application.
Well, you do it right now, don't we?
Bob wrote a letter and got the job that meant he must leave the city. A few weeks later, he and his wife ran a mining camp far up the Pelican River in the Yukon Territory.
It's a setup. They're going to
One
kill
morning,
you.
soon after breakfast, Bob returned unexpectedly to their cabin.
Bob, did you forget something?
No, I just got some news.
Oh, is it good or bad?
Depends on how you look at it. They're closing the mine for the winter.
Closing it? And we're out of a job again. And we practically just got here.
Wait, listen, Connie. They got to have someone stay in camp and keep the engines in order and look after things.
Yes.
The boss says I can have the job if I want it.
What did you tell him?
And I'd have to talk it over with you. Well,
of course we'll stay.
Now, wait a minute, Connie. Better think it over first. Gonna be mighty lonesome for you.
Nonsense. After all, I'll have you.
All right. If you're sure you won't be unhappy.
I think it'll be exciting. We'll have plenty of supplies and we'll get paid for staying.
Yeah, but what if one of us gets sick or is hurt and need a doctor? What then?
I hadn't thought of that.
There's doctors in Deerfield, 20 miles or more from here.
Bob, nothing will happen. Let's stay.
All right, Connie. I'll tell the boss we'll take the job.
Nothing will happen.
A few days later, Sergeant Preston and the great dog Yukon King arrived at the town of Deerfield. After checking in at the local hotel, the Mountie, still attired in his fur parka which concealed the red tunic, entered the cafe to be greeted by the proprietor, Joe Hicks.
Sergeant Preston and King.
How are you, Joe?
I couldn't be better, Sergeant, and I'm mighty glad to see two old friends.
Oh, thanks. But you might prove it with a cup of that fine coffee you make.
You bet I will. Sit down at that table. I'll be back with it in a minute.
Thanks, Joe. Come on, King.
Drink the tea.
Sergeant Preston didn't notice two men seated at a table across the big room. But one of them, Mush Roberts, saw and recognized the Mountie. He leaned across the table and spoke in a low voice to his companion.
Tex, that man with the dog is a Mountie.
Mountie?
Yeah, name's Preston. He might be looking for us.
What'll we do? He hasn't seen us yet.
Just sit quiet for a minute. Joe's getting coffee for him. We'll watch our chance to get out of here.
Better not try to get him, Mush. It'd be better if we leave one at a time.
I guess you're right. You leave and head to the cabin. I'll meet you there later.
Right.
Joe returned with 2 cups of coffee and sat down at Sergeant Preston's table.
Yeah, Sergeant. Brings you to Deerfield, Sergeant.
I'm to meet a man here, a fellow named Bledsoe.
Bledsoe? I believe I've ever heard of him.
Huh? Here's a picture of him.
Hey, I know Jim.
You do?
Sure. Only around here he's known as Sundown Jim. He's one of the luckiest chachagos that ever hit the Yukon. Struck it rich about a month ago. Run into a gold pocket as big as the moon. What's his real name, you say?
Bledsoe. Jim Bledsoe. Used to be a banker in Seattle.
Oh, yes. Now I remember. Bank went broke and ruined hundreds.
That's right.
Why'd he send for you?
Pardon me a moment, Joe.
What's the matter, Sergeant? Where you going?
That man heading for the door, I want him. As Tex Barber reached the door, Sergeant Preston gripped his arm. Not so fast, Tex.
Hey,
Don't try to pull a gun.
A Mountie?
Yes. You're under arrest in the name of the Queen.
What'd he do, Sergeant?
He's wanted for robbery and murder.
Murder?
As the customers in the cafe crowded about the Mountie and the outlaw, Sergeant Preston failed to see Mush Roberts leave quietly through a rear door. When he had disarmed his prisoner, Sergeant Preston asked, "You stopping at the tavern, Tex?"
No, I have a cabin on the edge of town. My gear is there.
Well, got it. I want to examine your pack.
Want me to go along with you, Sergeant?
That won't be necessary, Joe. I'll have King with me. Come on, King. Let's go, fella. Sergeant Preston and his prisoner, with King at their heels, pushed their way through the crowd and into the night. Tex Barber, who had seen his friend Mush Roberts leave the cafe ahead of them, set a slow pace, but made no resistance. Presently, he turned off the deserted street and approached a darkened cabin.
There's the cabin, Mountie.
You had keys when I searched you. You need one to open it?
No, it's not locked. I'll open the door.
Go ahead. Sergeant Preston didn't suspect that Mush Roberts had slipped through a rear door at the cafe and hurried to the cabin, where he was waiting behind the door with his gun raised like a club. All right, shoot first, Tex. Come on, King. King sensed something wrong and tried to give a warning. What's the matter, fella?
You got him. Look out the door. Get away. Shoot him, Mush. Shoot him. No, it'll rouse the whole town. Get out. Quick, get out.
Mush Roberts and Tex Barber fought their way to the door and slammed it behind them.
Why did you shoot him, Mush? I tore my arm off. Oh, a shot would have brought the whole town down on our ears. That dog went for me, too. What do we do about the Mountie? I hit him pretty hard. He won't come to for a long time. By then, yeah, might be frozen to death. There's no fire in the cabin. That's right. Let's get out of here. We got no blankets or gear, no grub. We won't last a day in this weather. I know where we can get everything we need. Where? At the mining camp 20 miles south of here. It closed down a few days ago. Come on, Tex. The camp will be under some kind of guard. Don't let that bother you. We'll take care of the guard.
Meanwhile, the arrest of Tex Barber provoked excited conversation among the customers in the cafe. Finally, one of the waiters asked the proprietor,
Joe, what happened to the fellow with him? With who? With Tex Barber. What are you talking about? The barber came in, he was with another fella. A big hombre with a scar on his nose. Well, they sat down over there at that table. You sure of that? Of course I'm sure. I served him. Well, he must have been the man I saw leave for the back door when the ruckus started. You saw a man sneak out the back way? Well, I wouldn't say he sneaked out. He just walked out. But he had a scar on his nose. I saw it. Then he's the one who came in with Tex Barber. Why didn't you tell Sergeant Preston about it? I just happen to remember it now. So did I. Well, we can tell the sergeant when he gets back. Well, I'm not waiting until he gets back. Where's my pipe? What are you going to do, Joe? Well, I heard Tex Barber tell Preston he was living in the cabin on the edge of town. Must be the one that had the for rent sign on it last week. I'm heading down that way. I'll go with you, Joe. Me too. Someone get the doctor. He may be needed. I hope we don't get there too late to prevent murder. Come on, boys.
We'll continue our adventure in just a moment. A bullseye for flavor. Yes, in every spoonful of the ready-to-serve breakfast cereals shot from guns, you enjoy swell nut-like flavor. A bullseye for Christmas. Yes, there's tender melt-in-your-mouth Christmas in those king-size kernels of Quaker puffed wheat and Quaker puffed rice. A bullseye for nourishment. Yes, Quaker puffed wheat and Quaker puffed rice give you added food values of restored natural grain amounts of vitamin B1, niacin, and iron. You're always on the target when you reach for that famous big red and blue package with the smiling Quaker man on the front. Pour out a bowl full of crisp, delicious Quaker puffed wheat or Quaker puffed rice. Add milk or cream, top with your favorite fruit. Man, oh man, these giant, flavor-rich premium grains are exploded up to 8 times normal size to make them crisp and tender. They're shot from guns to make them bigger and better tasting. Shot through and through with nut-like flavor, too. Buy both delicious kinds. For variety, eat Quaker puffed wheat one time, Quaker puffed rice the next. Just remember, they're never sold in bags or bulk. You can't miss with Quaker puffed wheat and Quaker puffed rice. The famous cereals shot from guns. Now to continue. Joe Hicks, proprietor of the cafe, led the group of heavily armed miners toward the cabin on the outskirts of town. When its outline appeared faintly in the darkness, he halted them.
Just a minute, man. You may be wasting time.
How do you mean, Joe?
There's no one in that cabin. No light in it.
I can't see it.
They'd come here in the first place. They'd be there now, and they'd have a light. Preston said he wanted to go through Tex Barber's gear.
Yeah, say, there's another vacant cabin on the other side of town. Maybe that's the one they went to. Well,
Then we'd better turn back. No use wasting time here.
Hey, listen. Dogs barking in that cabin. It must be King. Come on, men. I'll go in first. You men keep me covered.
Right behind you.
Them crooks will know better than to try to shoot their way out now. Go on, Joe.
King, all right. Easy, King, easy. I'm here to help you. Where's Sergeant Preston?
I'll speculate. There. Can you see now, Joe?
Yeah. Hey, here he is.
Let the doctor look at him, Joe.
He's been shot or slugged. Can't make out which. Someone light the lamp there.
I'll light it.
The boys move back here. Just give me a little room.
There. Here's the ladder.
Yeah, hold it close.
Is he dead, Doc?
No, he's alive. He's unconscious. Easy now, King. Your boss is going to be all right. You'll help me, fellas, huh?
Right.
We'll take him back to the cafe. Now, easy.
The following morning, Connie Warren was cooking breakfast when her young husband came in.
What have you been doing, Bob?
Building a head of steam on the donkey engine. Ooh, it's cold outside.
Why are you firing up the engine? I thought it had been drained for the winter.
Oh, we're going to run short of firewood. There's a pile of it down at the end of the donkey tracks. Use the engine to haul it up here.
That's a good idea. It'll save you having to cut down trees and put it into wood. Now sit down. Breakfast is ready.
Swell, honey. Sure am hungry.
Bob Warren hurried through his breakfast and left Connie to clear the table and do the dishes. A few moments after he had walked out of the cabin, she was startled by a heavy explosion. From the door of the cabin, she could see what had happened. The boiler of the donkey engine was split wide open and live steam foamed out. Then she saw her husband lying helpless in the snow.
Safety bag. Froze. Blew up.
You're hurt bad. Bob, I've got to get you to the cabin.
Bob Warren sank into unconsciousness as his wife struggled to lift him. He was a dead weight. She couldn't budge him and she became frantic. Then, in the distance, she heard
A donkey. Someone's coming. Oh, thank goodness.
A few moments later, a team of huskies raced to a stop beside her. From the huge cap of a fur parka, she saw the face of a middle-aged man, a large man.
Hurry! Hurry!
He surveyed the situation for a fleeting second, and then tied his team to a nearby tree. His dogs curled up in the snow, and the man turned to Connie.
On my way to Deerfield when I heard the explosion.
We've got to get him to the cabin. I tried, but I couldn't budge him.
You go get the bed ready for him. Get water on the stove, and I'll bring him in.
The stranger carried Bob Warren into the cabin and placed him in bed, and then began a careful examination of his injuries.
How badly is he hurt?
Arm's broken. He's scalded from the steam.
We've got to get him to a doctor. There's one in Deerfield, and you have a sled and dog.
I'd better set the broken arm before he regains consciousness.
Can you do it?
Yes. I'll cut splints and set it at once. Then I'll put him on my sled and take him to Deerfield.
When Bob's broken arm had been set and ointment put on his burns, the stranger and Connie went outside to the sled. He let her carry his camping gear into the house while he carried 2 heavy rawhide bags, which he placed on the table.
I'll leave these here with you. You need all the room on the sled for your husky.
You'll pardon me, but I think I've seen you before.
In Deerfield, perhaps.
No, I've never been to Deerfield, but your face is familiar.
Their conversation was interrupted by Bob Warren, who began to mumble incoherently.
He's trying to say something.
He may be delirious.
Get you. I'll get you someday. When I do, you go to jail, Jim Bledsoe.
What did he say?
He's out of his head.
I'll get you, Jim Bledsoe. I'll get you.
But the name, he keeps repeating it.
Yes, he's talking about a man named Bledsoe.
Well, is it someone he knows?
Jim Bledsoe was a banker back home.
Get you.
His bank closed and he disappeared. We lost everything we had.
I see.
Bob has hated Bledsoe ever since it happened. At times I think he would kill him if he ever found him.
How much did you lose in the bank's failure, Mrs.
Warren. I'm Connie Warren.
Yes, Miss Warren.
We lost all our savings, about $5,000.
The stranger turned and walked to the table where he had deposited the 2 heavy rawhide bags. Connie watched him with curiosity as he began unlacing the opening of one of them.
What are you going to do?
Pay a debt for Jim Bledsoe.
Hey, a debt for Jim Bledsoe. Did you know him?
Yes, Mrs. Warren. I knew him well.
2 men.
Don't make a move, either of you. Come on, Tex. Who are you and what do you want here?
They're armed.
Take it easy, sister. And his gun, Tex. I'll keep him covered. He has one gun, 45. Here's another. Hey, mister, you tote plenty of hardware, don't you? Now, search the guy in the bunk. He may be playing possum.
No, can't you see he's been badly hurt? We've got to get him to a doctor in Deerfield.
Yes, she's right, Marsh. This fella's been banged up. His arm's in splints. He's all bandaged.
There's nothing here you want. Just let us alone so we can take my husband to Deerfield.
If you take him, you're going to walk. What do you mean by that? We need a dog team and supplies and a sled to carry them. We're taking the team that's outside.
But you can't do that. My husband will die.
Sorry, ma'am, but if you don't put plenty of miles between us and Deerfield, we'll die. Now, Tex, start gathering up blankets and grub while I keep these two quiet. Right, Marsh.
Tex looted the cabin of supplies and blankets, while Mush studied the face of the stranger.
Hey, what's your name, mister? Why should that interest you? I have a feeling I've seen you before, somewhere. I think you're wrong. I know I never saw you before. Well, Marsh, I got everything we need on the sled. We're ready to pull out of here. What do we do with these two? Tie them up, I guess. But Tex, wait a minute. You ever see this fella before? Him? Yeah. I'd swear I have. Face is familiar. Yeah, it is. Hey, he can't... Yeah, you recognize him? Well, sure. Mush? You remember the banker who disappeared from Seattle after his bank went bust? What? Bledsoe. Sure, that's who it is. Bledsoe. I saw his picture in the newspapers. Holy smoke.
Yes, that's it. I knew I'd seen his picture in the papers. It is Bledsoe.
Yes, Mrs. Warren, it's true. I'm Bledsoe.
You're the man who ruined us. And ruined others, too.
Quiet, you. Tex, take a look at those bags on the table. Maybe they hold the loot he stole from the bank. I stole nothing from the bank. Go ahead, Tex, take a look. Holy smoke, there's a fortune in gold here. Raw gold. Looks like this is our lucky day. We not only get dogs and supplies, but we get a banker's fortune. And he won't dare squawk to the mounted. They're looking for him. Yeah. Hey, get it to the sled. Then come back here and we'll tie him up before we leave. All I can lift. You'll never get away. The Mounties will get you. Shut up, Bledsoe. Hey, Mark, look. Now, what's wrong, Tex? The Mountie and his dog. They're heading here. Well, get out of sight and shut the door. See, we're all ready. What do we do, Mike? Kill him. Out of the way, Tex. I'll drop him.
Jim Bledsoe, the one-time Seattle banker, saw Mush Roberts turn to fire at Sergeant Preston and realized that if he was to save the life of the Mountie, he must risk his own. But he didn't hesitate. He swung his heavily booted foot at the table, upsetting it. The upset table struck the outlaw and spoiled his aim, sending the shot into the jamb of the door. Bledsoe heard a shout from outside the cabin as the two bandits whirled about to face him. The great dog king rushed through the door to seize Tex Barber's gun arm. Hey! Let go! Meanwhile, Jim Bledsoe, the banker, grappled with Mush Roberts for possession of the gun.
No, you don't ever do.
When Sergeant Preston reached the open door, he recognized Jim Bledsoe. To use his gun might endanger the banker's life. Sergeant Preston entered the fight with swinging fists. Tex reeled under the impact of Sergeant Preston's blows. He tried futilely to reach the gun which had fallen to the floor.
This will take care of you. I have it.
Mush Roberts heard voices outside the cabin. A glance told him that a group of men led by Joe Hicks were closing in.
Come on, Tex, run. No, you don't. Don't move, Tex. We can't get away, Marsh. Come on, boys. Preston, go. Get your hands up. Hey, don't shoot. We quit.
I arrest both of you for robbery and murder in the name of the Queen.
Have your finest, Preston.
That was easy. After my friends found and revived me, King picked up your trail. He had good reason to hate both of you.
This must be your lucky day instead of ours.
What do you mean by that?
That fella there. He's Jim Bledsoe, the Seattle banker who disappeared.
You're wrong about him, Mush. I don't want him.
You don't?
No.
I might have expected it. A man can steal from his own bank and the law don't do a thing about it. But take me and Tex. Well, that's different. We'll hang.
You'll hang, no doubt of that. But I was on my way to Deerfield to meet Bledsoe when I ran into you and Tex.
Sergeant, I was going to surrender.
There's no surrender involved, Bledsoe.
I don't understand.
I'll explain later. Right now, that man on the bunk there seems to need a doctor's care.
Is there a doctor with you, Sergeant?
Yes. Take over, Doc.
You bet I will, Sergeant. And the women.
The prisoners were handcuffed and removed from the cabin where members of the posse stood guard over them. Connie provided the doctor with medicines from the company's stores, and soon he turned to face the little group watching him.
Mitchell?
Yes, Doctor.
You did a good job of fixing him on up. His arm's perfectly set, and you took care of his burns very well. It's a good thing you were here. You saved his life.
Yes, Mr. Bledsoe. You saved his life.
And paid a debt long overdue. Sergeant, you said you'd explain something.
Well, suppose you explain why you disappeared after your bank closed.
Gladly. I'd made some investments that were bad. I knew I couldn't pay off dollar for dollar to my depositors with a few assets left after the run. I swore to myself I'd see that every cent was paid back. But I knew that would take time.
So you came to the Yukon and took the name of Sundown Jim?
Yes. I never stole a cent from anybody. Well, Sergeant, I discovered gold. Enough to pay back the depositors with interest in full. I wrote you a letter saying I'd surrender to you.
You thought there was an embezzlement charge against you?
Yes, there was talk in the newspapers about it after the bank closed.
There never has been a charge against you, Jim.
What?
Investigation of the bank records prove everything you said.
But I thought the law wanted me.
We wanted to find you to tell you you'd been cleared. You see, Jim, the mounted police protect the innocent as well as prosecute the guilty.
That's right, Jim.
Then I'm free?
Yes.
Well, just the same, I'm going to keep my promise. I'm paying back every depositor. And Mrs. Warren, you and your husband are the first to be repaid.
Oh.
Sergeant, will you open the bank's gold?
Gladly, Jim.
When Bob hears this, he'll get well quickly, won't he, Doctor?
No doubt of it, Mrs. Warren, and I guess he'll be glad to admit that Mr. Bledsoe isn't as bad as he thought.
There you are, Jim.
Thanks, Sergeant. I'll weigh it up.
Now, King, let's go get our prisoner.
Oh.
Yes, boy. As far as Jim Bledsoe is concerned, this case is closed. In just a moment, Sergeant Preston will give you a preview of Friday's adventure. There's still time, fellows and girls. Go to your grocers. Ask for the exciting new Yukon Trail packages of still-tasting Quaker puffed rice and Quaker puffed wheat. There are 8 different packages that come with these larger, easier-to-build Yukon cutout models. There are 59 exciting models in all. You hear about many of them in these adventures of Sergeant Preston and King. For instance, you get models of the Dead Dutchman gold mine and of a lumber camp. You get Sergeant Preston's cabin and the White Horse Jail, the Northwest Mounted Police Headquarters at Dawson, Yukon Queen riverboat with a paddle that turns. Remember, there are different models on different packages. Don't miss out on any of these thrilling Yukon Trail models. Get them all. There's no waiting, no box tops or coupons, no money to send. These 59 fascinating Yukon Trail models are yours at no extra cost. But remember, you get them only on packages of Quaker puffed wheat and Quaker puffed rice. The original, crisp, fresh, shot-from-gun cereal that is never sold in bags or bulk. You'll want the complete set of 8 Yukon Trail packages. They're at your grocers now. Hurry. Listen Friday when Sergeant Preston and Yukon King meet the challenge of the Yukon in the case of the Lost Lady. Lady was a beautiful golden white collie. She belonged to young Josiah Watson, and when she was stolen, the boy lost more than a friend. You see, Ty had lost his sight, and without Lady, he was helpless. Lady came home finally, but with her there were 3 desperate men. When I knocked on the door of the Watson cabin that night in March, Ty and his father were prisoners, and an outlaw gun was leveled at the door. Be sure to hear this exciting adventure Friday. These radio dramas, a feature of the Challenge of the Yukon Incorporated, are created by George W. Trendle, produced by Trendle Campbell Enterprises, directed by Fred Flowerday, and edited by Fran Stryker. The part of Sergeant Preston is played by Paul Sutton. They are brought to every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at the same time by Quaker Puffed Wheat and Quaker Puff Rice, the breakfast cereal shot from guns.
You're listening to Chin Radio AM 1540.
Remember, for delicious hot breakfast, enjoy Quaker Oats. The giant of the cereal is Quaker Oats. Delicious, nutritious, makes you feel ambitious. The giant of the cereal is Quaker Oats. And here's why Quaker Oats is called the giant of the cereals. There's more growth, more endurance in oatmeal than any other whole grain cereal. So make your hot breakfast nourishing Quaker Oats. Quaker and Mother's Oats are the same. This is J. Michael wishing you goodbye, good luck, and good health from Quaker Puff Wheat and Quaker Puff Rice. So long. This is ABC, the American Broadcasting Company.
You're listening to Chin Radio AM 1540, the voice of multicultural Toronto, bringing you the latest updates on COVID-19. Stay informed, stay safe, and stay tuned to Chin Radio AM 1540.
Sound off for Chesterfield. Chesterfield, the first and only cigarette in America to give you premium quality in both regular and king size, brings you Dragnet. Ladies and gentlemen, the story you are about to hear is true. The names have been changed to protect the innocent. You're a detective sergeant. You're assigned to auto theft detail. A gang of car strippers has been operating in your city. From their MO, you know they're professionals. They move fast. Your job? Get them. Friends, you'll remember some months ago we read you our first report, the 6 months report on the effects of smoking. Then more recently we read you the 8 months report. Now, here is the latest one.
In response to any allegation of misconduct that is brought forward, no matter the rank, no matter the position. And let me just say, every woman in Canada should be able to do her job free of harassment.
Defense Minister Harjit Sajjan late Wednesday revealed that McDonald had voluntarily stepped aside while military police investigate unspecified allegations. The country's Deputy Chief Public Health Officer says 40% of seniors over 80 have received one dose of the COVID-19 vaccine. About 5.5% have received a second dose. Dr. Howard New also says now is not the time for people to let their guard down, adding the virus remains a serious threat.
I realize I'm saying this as provinces and territories are reopening, and that is my point. Just because we are now allowed to resume activities like going to the gym or a pub doesn't necessarily mean we should. Determine what you need to do and assess your risks.
The more contagious variant, first detected in the United Kingdom, has become a significant concern in Montreal, where there's still widespread community transmission. With vaccine deliveries now ramping up, the Ontario government says it's planning to iron out any wrinkles before allowing the general public to book COVID-19 vaccinations online. Global's Rick Zamperin reports.
Health Minister Christine Elliott says an online booking system for COVID-19 vaccination appointments is not yet available because the province doesn't want to rush to failure. Elliott says more tests are needed to ensure the system can handle the large volume of requests expected. She says the aim is to ensure it won't crash when it does go live. The head of the province's vaccine task force has said people aged 80 and older will be able to access the system starting March 15th. Rick Samprin, Global News.
One infectious disease expert says data she's seen on the impact of vaccinations in long-term care settings has been remarkable. Dr. Lenora Saxinger from the University of Alberta says the number of people affected by outbreaks and the number of deaths linked to long-term care settings have all been dropping.
We're always worried that, the very old people or frail people might not have a strong vaccine response, but this really does appear to be substantially protective, and it really is something that we've needed. So it's great news for long-term care, and also now that we can get more elderly people in the community be immunized, we should continue to see those benefits.
Saxinger says her understanding is that public health officials are waiting for more formal data before making decisions on allowing more people to visit family members in care. In sports, the Montreal Canadiens continue to struggle, falling 6-3 to the Winnipeg Jets. Habs goalie Carey Price frustrated that the team couldn't win for first-time head coach Dominique Ducharme.
Yeah, obviously disappointing. Dom's going to be great for us moving forward. And, just got to be better.
Montreal will round out their two-game set with the Jets on Saturday. Meanwhile, 7 different Islanders found the twine as New York blew out the Boston Bruins 7-2, and Connor McDavid scoring his 14th goal of the year to help the Oilers shut out the Canucks 3-0. From the Global News Desk, I'm Darren Bolins.
Oh, my God. Oh, crap. Dear me. Your contribution to the COVID kitchen, Bernie.
Du directeur c'est l'entourage de Dan Gertler entre ses comptes et lui-même. En tout cas, les deux lanceurs d'alerte appellent au gouvernement et les instances habilitées à mener des enquêtes approfondies dans ces secteurs. Passion Ligodi, Kinshasa, RFI.
C'est un nouveau déboire qui ne va pas arranger les affaires du 777 de Boeing, moins d'une semaine après un incident spectaculaire aux de 120 avions de ce modèle à travers le monde. Un 777 de la compagnie Rossiya a à son tour dû se poser en urgence à Moscou ce matin, en cause cette fois non pas un problème de réacteur mais un incident moteur. Sur le front de la pandémie de Covid-19, alors que la Corée du Sud et Hong Kong ont lancé ce matin leur campagne de vaccination, en Europe, la Bulgarie s'était distinguée il y a quelques jours dans sa stratégie vaccinale. Contrairement à la plupart des autres pays de l'UE, le pays avait alors décidé d'ouvrir les injections à tous les Bulgares, sans distinction et toutes catégories d'âge confondues. Seul problème, moins d'une semaine plus tard, les doses font défaut et les retards de livraison poussent les autorités à faire machine arrière. Un tâtonnement qui ne manque pas de faire jaser à Sofia un mois seulement avant les élections législatives. Correspondance sur place, Damien Dvodenicharov.
Des corridors verts pour la vaccination de masse, c'est le nom donné à ce nouveau volet de la stratégie vaccinale lancé le samedi 20 février. Pourtant, les 4 phases ciblées ne sont pas abandonnées. D'après le docteur Hassan Baltov, directeur de l'hôpital Pirogov à Sofia, elles continueront en parallèle.
Les 4 phases de vaccination continuent. Dans notre hôpital, nous allons procéder à la vaccination ciblée jusqu'à 13 heures. Après 13 heures, nous allons ouvrir 5 postes de vaccination. Tout le monde pourra recevoir le vaccin d'Oxford.
La nouvelle étape a provoqué des files d'attente à travers le pays. Seules 15 000 doses ont pu être inoculées avant l'arrêt de la vaccination en raison de retard. Le taux de vaccination reste faible. Un peu plus d'1% de la population a reçu la première dose. En guise d'excuse, AstraZeneca a réitéré la complexité de la tâche, s'attirant les critiques du ministre de la Santé, Kostadin Angelov.
Nous avons attendu des réponses claires pendant 2 jours et nous n'avons rien vu venir. Chers représentants d'AstraZeneca, nous n'avons pas besoin de formules de politesse, mais nous avons besoin de vaccins.
Les enjeux de la campagne de vaccination sont aussi politiques. Des élections législatives se tiendront le 4 avril. D'après les prévisions, le paysage politique risque d'être chamboulé avec un recul important dans les sondages des partis traditionnels comme le Parti socialiste et le parti guerre du Premier ministre Boyko Borisov. Damien Vodeničarov, Sofia, RFI.
En France, le Premier ministre Jean Castex a lui annoncé hier la mise sous surveillance renforcée de 20 départements où la situation se dégrade. C'était dans la conférence de presse hebdomadaire sur l'épidémie des autorités. Si aucune amélioration n'y est constatée dans ces 20 départements, la semaine prochaine, eh bien, de nouvelles restrictions y seront instaurées, et ce à partir du week-end du 6 mars. La France, où l'actualité, c'est aussi la Convention citoyenne pour le climat qui tient ce week-end sa dernière session. Elle se déroule alors que le projet de loi climat et résilience va commencer à être examiné au Parlement. À l'ordre du jour pour les 150 citoyens qui avaient pour mission de proposer des mesures destinées à réduire les émissions de gaz à effet de serre dans l'Hexagone d'ici 2030, un bilan de la traduction législative des mesures qu'ils avaient actées.
Say the priority is to protect lives, which means democratic norms. They have to be paused.
Our concept is that if it's required, if it's needed, if it's urgency,
these decrees are going to be issued. Extraordinary measures are required to address the extraordinary circumstances caused by the virus and fighting the virus.
Responding to the virus means that the government must act with speed when required, and we cannot hold up urgent regulations which are needed to control the virus and save lives.
So how much of a setback has this been for democracy, and can the trend be reversed? In Myanmar, there's the threat of long jail sentences for breaking coronavirus restrictions. But in the wake of the coup, people are undeterred from coming out to demand their rights. And in Algeria, pro-democracy protesters who left the streets as the pandemic took hold are back. But once democratic freedoms are snatched away, can they be clawed back? And where they've barely taken root, can they be snuffed out for good? Hundreds of thousands of lives have been lost in the pandemic, but has the health of democracy also suffered? Our scope is truly global this week. This is a story which takes in both long-established democracies and their newer counterparts. Wielding the sword of interrogation and explanation with me are our panel. Sarah Rapucci leads the Research and Analysis Department for Freedom House. That's a Washington-based NGO which conducts research and advocacy on democracy and political freedom. She's also the co-author of the report Democracy Under Lockdown. Welcome to The Real Story, Sarah Rapucci. Can you think of one specific incident that was an alarm bell for you about the health of democracy during the pandemic?
I think for me, it has centered around elections. And of course, last year here in the United States was an election year, and we had a primary coming up here in New York, and thinking about, well, how are we going to go to the polls? And if we couldn't go to the polls, then how are we going to have an election? And if we can't have an election, how can we have democracy? And if that's here in New York, being a global expert, how that must be affecting the entire world. I think for me, that was a big moment.
That's pretty fundamental. David Kay is our next panelist. He's clinical professor of law at the University of California, Irvine. He was the UN Special Rapporteur on the promotion and protection of the right to freedom of opinion and expression from 2014 to 2020. He's the author of Speech Police, the Global Struggle to Govern the Internet. Welcome to The Real Story, David Kay. Was there a country or an episode that especially worried you when it comes to a clampdown on democracy during the pandemic?
Yeah, it's a really important question. And sadly, as your setup indicated, you could name dozens of different places. And I would just actually identify the most recent one that's been on the global radar, and that's Myanmar, that your setup closed with. This is a government that in the midst of the pandemic has shut down the internet entirely in some parts of the country and has been engaging in repeated interference with freedom of expression across the country, which is both an issue of democratization and democracy in the country and the coup, and the issue of the pandemic and how people get information.
I hope we'll come back and talk about that example a little bit more. Let's hear from our third panelist. Jacob Mchangma is the founder and executive director of the Danish freedom of speech organisation, Justitia, and he's also the host and narrator of the podcast Clear and Present Danger, A History of Free Speech. Welcome to The Real Story, Jacob. Was there a specific incident that you would point to when it comes to the pandemic and potential incursions on democracy?
Yeah, well, I'm based in Copenhagen, Denmark, which in many ways, of course, is a safe space for press freedom and freedom of expression compared to many other places in the world. But here we had an emergency law which allowed police to block certain websites without a prior court order. And that prompted our Minister of Defense to go out and say, this is quite an efficient remedy to be able to stop these fake websites. So maybe we should prolong it and make it indefinite, because we have this wonderful new tool, which of course would never have been adopted without the specific context and the COVID-19 crisis. And you know, if that can happen in Denmark, if these ideas get traction in Denmark, and we've already seen that, there's a clear and present danger to free speech around the world.
So it is interesting. We've already name-checked the United States, Myanmar, Denmark in this conversation. It really gives you a sense of how global this is. Let's meet our fourth panelist, Suhas Chakma. He's director of the New Delhi-based think tank Rights and Risk Analysis Group. You're in India, Suhas. What's worried you most about the health of democracy there as the pandemic has progressed?
Well, I think when the pandemic came, Prime Minister of India, without any earlier notification, announced lockdown of the entire country. So next couple of days, you had basically millions of people on the streets without job, without food, without any kind of security, trying to return home. So when the issue came up, I think on the 29th of March last year, when the Supreme Court took up this issue of safety and security of the migrant workers, the first application moved by the government of India was basically to say that the media should not be allowed to report anything on COVID-19 without the sanction of the government. So the only source of information relating to COVID-19 had to be the government of India. Fortunately, the Supreme Court said, no, you could issue your own bulletins at the end of the day, every day, but you cannot prevent the media as well as the citizenry from having access to information. Then the media started reporting about it, and I think when we counted before the end of the lockdown, 55 journalists, arrested, prosecuted, they had cases filed against them, and many of them were tortured.
Let's open up this discussion more broadly. Sarah Rapucci, the Freedom House report you co-authored, talks about COVID-19 fueling a crisis for democracy and governments using the pandemic as a way to silence their critics. How broad is this trend? And are you able to give us a few examples?
Yeah, it's incredibly broad. I mean, what we found was that countries across the political spectrum, across geography, across income levels, were using the pandemic to varying degrees as an excuse to crack down on freedoms that may or may not be linked to health. We were seeing it in everything from countries in Europe that were using heavy-handed surveillance measures to keep track of health, to countries in Africa and Nigeria, for instance, where to enforce lockdowns, they were beating people in the streets. We saw effects on marginalized communities, as Suhas was talking about in India, populations that didn't have the resources or the representation to protect themselves. But we also saw it on just average citizens in really wide range of countries.
But is this a real blip? I mean, there are many people who might say, well, you could have had this conversation at any point in the last, 20, 50 years. Has the pandemic simply accelerated existing trends or opened up new possibilities?
I think it's done both. So, at Freedom House, we've been tracking a global decline in democracy over the last 14 years. So that trend started long ago, and it has many factors that have nothing to do with the pandemic. The pandemic was an opportunity to exacerbate a lot of those trends, as you say. For instance, in Hungary, we were seeing decline for many years, but then the Fidesz government was able to consolidate its power through the emergency measures that it put in place for COVID, and then pushed through constitutional amendments at the end of the year. But I think one of the key issues is, using that example, the way that the measures that were put in place during the pandemic are going to outlive the pandemic. Now that these constitutional changes have been put in place in Hungary, those changes will be there when we no longer have a health crisis. And that's the part of this that I think is especially egregious.
Okay, I want to talk about that later in the program, about whether these changes can be rolled back, but I want to stick with what we're seeing happening as we live through this. David Kay, Suhas brought up the question of the fate of journalists, or the treatment of journalists in India during the pandemic. Is freedom of expression a particular victim, do you think, during the pandemic?
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I think what you're hearing from the different panelists here is how the assault, I would call it an assault on freedom of expression and on reporting and on peaceful protest, is fairly comprehensive. And I think, in a way, what's making the moment worse, what exacerbates the problems, is that we have multiple authorities, essentially, that are involved in restricting expression. So on the one hand, we have governments, like those that have been mentioned, that are cracking down on really the legitimate sharing of information, right? Reporting on perhaps government's bad behavior during the pandemic, or using it, as Sarah mentioned, in Hungary, using the pandemic as a cover to do things that it had wanted to do for a long time and gain total control over the media landscape. But at the same time, I think there's this kind of confusion in the public and an opportunity that governments see because of the role of private actors, the private platforms that are mediating so much of our expression. And so you see a government like India demand of Twitter that it take down the content, it take down the accounts of journalists. And, on the one hand, the public, broadly speaking, sees the platforms as having this massive power that's unaccountable. And so there's a sense that, they deserve it almost, that some people have. But governments, I think, are really exploiting the situation. It's not that it's fundamentally new, it's that the situation has in a way sharpened the sense that people have that we're in a kind of information confusion, and governments are taking advantage of that.
Jacob Mchangama, what other examples then would you point to where, in a sense, this intersection between the online world and governments has collided perhaps in a way that would have been seen as benign not that long ago, but is actually proving to be really quite negative for democracy?
Yeah, just going back to what David said, I think the censorship pandemic hit at a moment where you could say the global immune system of free speech was already weakened, because that's to a wide degree what I see free speech as. Free speech is extremely important to guard against authoritarianism, to guard against corruption, and that's why a lot of governments don't particularly care for free speech. And so it provided them an opportunity to really go after free speech and provide them some legitimacy in doing so, because they were saying, we're not cracking down on dissidents here. It's not to end political pluralism. We're doing this to protect our population against a pandemic and against bad actors who are spreading misinformation. And by the way, democracies are doing the same. Some of them are also adopting these laws, and if they're not, they're putting a lot of pressure on social media platforms to do much more to remove mis and disinformation. And we've seen huge spike in the number of takedowns. We did at Justitia, my think tank, we tried to track global coronavirus free speech restrictions between February 1st and June 15th, 2020, and we recorded at least 70 legislative and policy changes with various forms of censorship related to COVID-19, and at least 703 arrests and detention in a lot of countries. And a lot of it having to do with online speech regarding spreading of rumors or fake news related to the virus.
And Suhas, I know there's been a lot of concern about that in India too, but I just want to bring up one other concern, which is the targeting of minorities during the pandemic. Has it been an excuse for governments, in a sense, or for actors, important actors, to use, whether it's the media, whether it's that closing down of the public space, to target minorities in ways they perhaps haven't been able to before?
When the COVID-19 pandemic started, there was a meeting which took place in Delhi, which was organized by Tablighi Jamaat, which is an Islamic sect. And possibly many of the people who had participated in that meeting had already taken visa prior to it became a global pandemic. So they came to India, and they happened to have met at a place in Delhi. And because the meeting took place in violations of the lockdown restriction, including social distancing, I think we had almost for 3 months vilification of the Muslim community as a community which has been spreading coronavirus as threat to the India's national security, and of course, trying to harm the territorial integrity. People of the country have to be aware or stay away from these groups. And when the states started to crack down all over the country, because people had participated from all these states of India, then it became a huge news story. And I think it continued for 4 or 5 months. I think till about 3 months back, Mumbai High Court came back saying that there was a vilification of the Muslim community. Right. But I think by that time, the damage has already been done. So, the pandemic provided a number of opportunities to target minorities in a particular way.
So another really important example. Let's focus on one country that was in the spotlight in January when President Yoweri Museveni, who's been governing Uganda for 35 years, was re-elected for another 5 years in office. Much of Uganda's young population has known only one leader, and many found hope for change in the candidacy of a much younger musician turned politician. That's Bobi Wine. But it was alleged that, fearful of losing the election, the government used coronavirus-related restrictions to round up Bobi Wine's supporters. Here he is speaking to the BBC just days before the vote.
The military raided my home. They jumped over the fence. They arrested my gardeners and also arrested the guard that guards my house. They beat them viciously right in front of me, and they took them away. They take them. We don't know where they've taken them. We have tried to look for them at every police station. They are not there. This is a pattern that has been going on for a while. All our colleagues are under arrest. The military now is the one carrying out those operations, arresting all people that are seen to have been supporting me. When I was in Kalangala on the 30th of December, 126 members of my campaign team were rounded up. I was singled out and airlifted in a military chopper. Everybody else was taken to prison, and they have been in prison up to today. So there has been an effort to disconnect me from my support team and to render me handicapped.
That's Bobi Wine. Let's hear the government response. Betty Amongi is a senior member of Mr. Museveni's cabinet. My colleague Razia Iqbal asked her why the government insisted on arresting opposition activists during the election campaign.
It is not the government insisting on arresting. It is the candidates who deliberately refuse to follow the guidelines issued by the Independent Electoral Commission, the guidelines as of COVID-19, and so the arrest was in response to their violation of the laws and regulations of the country.
Let me just put something to you from the United Nations Human Rights Office. They say that they increasingly observe that COVID-19 restrictions have been enforced more strictly to curtail the opposition electoral campaign activities in a discriminatory fashion.
I would want to disagree because there was no discrimination. There are 11 candidates. All the rest of the candidates have been able to follow the guidelines, and there has not been any arrest of the rest of the candidates. There are only 2 candidates who openly indicated at the beginning of their campaign that they are going to defy the guidelines related to COVID-19, and they will hold mass elections and mass rallies. So when investigations are concluded, then officers will go and find them wherever they are. They must face the law.
Why has the government of Uganda not accredited international observers? So much so that the United States has said that they've cancelled the observation of the election because the vote would lack accountability and transparency.
The government of Uganda did not in any way reject any observer.
So the United States put in applications for 75 observers, only 10 were accredited. Why is that?
Because under the guideline of COVID-19, we are supposed to have standard operating procedures where you cannot have everybody the way we used to accredit observers.
That's Uganda Minister Betty Amongi speaking in January. Sarah, how unusual is that Ugandan example? It's interesting that you spoke about your fears for the US election at the beginning of the programme, but have elections in a sense suffered too?
Yeah, so I guess what's interesting is they haven't suffered the way that I initially thought that they would. I thought the elections wouldn't go forward. Instead, most elections did go forward. Nearly all planned elections did take place, but there were these arbitrary restrictions on campaigning that were targeting opposition members. And so Uganda is a perfect example of that. And of course, you know, the government representative that you spoke to says, well, there were bans in certain places, but Bobi Wine was arrested one time for campaigning in an area that was not included in the ban. So that is a pretty clear sign that it was a political targeting. There were more than 20 elections that went forward in 2020, and many of those had these types of crackdowns. We saw it in Belarus. We saw it in Burundi. There was an election in Sri Lanka that was very flawed. Over and over again, what you saw was the incumbent being able to use COVID restrictions to limit the campaigning of the opposition and then retain power.
We're going to pick up this conversation in just a few minutes, but we do have to take a short break now. A reminder that if you'd like to listen to past editions of the programme, such as our discussion last week about what role should big tech play in helping the news industry's funding, is it time that the likes of Google and Facebook share
extra long shower. All of this is possible when you have a Calcana garage heater. Enjoy heat and comfort in your garage all winter long.
That's what I need, is a shower in my garage.
Just hop in and go.
A shower in my garage.
Calgary.
Look at your national weather forecast. Halifax, mainly sunny, -6.
Oh, I don't have to
Ottawa,
watch
sunny,
that.
-1. Toronto, sunny, 3. Calgary, light snow, 1.
For breaking news, traffic, and weather, this is 680 News.
It's Friday, February 26th. Good morning. I'm Catherine Jette.
I'm Paul Cook. Here's what's making news right now.
What's the price
In
of
regions,
coal?
we move to a different phase of COVID-19 restrictions and with a change in the vaccine rollout save lives. Both questions up for discussion today at Queen's Park.
Toronto bars and restaurants can this morning begin applying to install outdoor curb lane and sidewalk patio locations. And pending approval, some could be open in time for the May long weekend.
Last weekend of February bringing spring-like conditions with showers and highs around 7 degrees on the way.
It's his first military action since becoming U.S. president. Joe Biden orders airstrikes in Syria along the border to Iraq after rocket attacks on American forces in the region.
What is the future of Kyle Lowry in town when it comes to the Raptors and possible trade rumors? We'll fill you in on the details as they get ready to face the Rockets tonight. Sports at 45. Market volatility to the max, coming off one of the worst days of 2021 so far for Bay and Wall Streets. The price for Bitcoin taking a nosedive. Business at 56. Time 5:31.
Time for 680 News, traffic and weather together on the one. Helena Volkes at the Traffic Center. Good morning, Helena.
Good morning, Catherine and Paul. The traffic story is a pretty short one today with just a couple of ramp closures for construction. Eastbound 401 ramp to McCowan closed for that reason, and the southbound McCowan ramp to the westbound 401. Other than that, overnight construction has cleared. Off the highways, we've got the closure of eastbound Ellesmere from Markham Road to Scarborough Golf Club Road. Collision investigation taking place there. Next traffic report at 5:41 with the forecast. Jill Taylor.
Well, just a gorgeous day on the way for us. Lots of sunshine and then heads up for rain and snow overnight. Right now, it's clear. -7 degrees at Pearson, -3 at 680 News. Feels closer to -6 or -12 with that wind. Guaranteed high today, +4.
680 News Time 5:32.
The full government's COVID-19 battle plan once again up for discussion at Queen's Park, including potential changes to public health restrictions in some regions and a report calling on the province to rethink the vaccine rollout.
Our Kevin Meisner joins us live from Queen's Park this morning. Good morning, Kevin.
Good morning, Paul. Yeah, Chief Medical Officer of Health, Dr. David Williams, is considering requests from some areas of Ontario concerned about rising COVID-19 case counts and the numbers of suspected variants. The Ford cabinet is going to be discussing today whether Thunder Bay should be moved into lockdown again after rising infection numbers, which have closed a number of schools in
turn
that
slowly.
city.
Why should I? I'm telling you to.
Officer of
You'll
Health
have to give me a
also
better
suggesting
reason.
that
I haven't got to give
that
myself.
person would like to see
You
all
see that?
schools
We got
move to online learning for the next couple of weeks because of the rising cases. Meantime, there is concern about people traveling to Simcoe Muskoka, where the region's top doctor wants tighter restrictions to limit travel into and throughout the area, which has dealt with several outbreaks driven by variants. Although it's difficult to imagine how that would be done, and Dr. Williams also saying it's a tenuous time when it comes to Peel and Toronto as well, both continuing under extended stay-at-home orders until March the 8th. At Queen's Park, Kevin Meisner, 680 News.
6 City News Time 5:33. Peel region is ramping up its COVID-19 vaccination efforts with 4 new clinics set to open next month. 2 of the sites will open on Monday. The Brampton Soccer Center at Sandalwood Parkway in Dixie will have a capacity of 7,800 daily doses. The University of Toronto Mississauga Recreation, Athletics and Wellness Center will be able to administer 2,000 daily doses. A vaccination clinic at the Paramount Fine Foods Center Field House opens next Wednesday, followed by a site at the Caledon East Community Complex March 6th, and another site at the International Center in Mississauga March 10th. A 5th clinic is set to open in April. The region currently has 2 vaccination clinics operating at its Mississauga and Brampton headquarters.
680 News Time 5:34. Loblaw says it's ready to play a key role in this country's COVID-19 vaccination efforts. The company president, Sarah Davis, says the grocery and pharmacy retailer supply chain is able to deliver vaccines and begin administering them the day it receives the shots. Davis making these comments during a conference call going over the company's 4th quarter finances. She says the company's 1,300 drugstores across the country are within 10 minutes of most Canadians and have administered shots for years and are well positioned to do the same with the COVID-19 vaccines. But David adds Loblaw has not been given the rollout strategy across all provinces or the timing yet.
This is 6 City News. We are one step closer to patio season. Restaurant and bar owners can apply for the city's KPT program starting on the last Friday of February. 6 City's Carl Hansky joins us live with the story. Good morning, Carl.
Yeah, good morning, Catherine. Starting at 9 this morning, local restaurant and bar owners interested in expanding their outdoor dining space into curb lanes and sidewalks can register online. And pending public health approval, the curb lane locations could be ready to open in time for the May long weekend. I'm heading to the beach this morning. I'll be talking to people about that, sitting outside, having a pint for those days. Now, the city says it's made improvements to this year's KPT program to make it easier for restaurant and bar owners to apply and faster to get approval for the permits. They realize it's a lifeline for the food and beverage industry. Reporting live, Carl Hansky, 680. 680 News Time 5:35. We are heading into the final weekend of February, and it's going to be mild. Our meteorologist Jill Taylor says the nice weather starts today with sunshine and a 680 News guaranteed high of 4 degrees.
Looks like Saturday will be the better day of the weekend. We've got the rain ending around 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, and then we'll get into some sun and cloud and up to 7 degrees.
High on Sunday, also expected to hit 7, but rain is also in the forecast. For Monday, the 1st of March, Jill says it'll be windy with temperatures falling to -5 during the day.
This is 6 City News. 2 men have been taken into custody following a stabbing and robbery in Mississauga. Police say a taxi driver was stabbed in the chest during the incident. It happened in the area of Hurontario and Dundas just after 9 last night. The man was taken to hospital with not life-threatening injuries. The suspects ran from the scene and is ongoing.
680 News Time 5:36. It is the first big military move of Joe Biden's presidency. The U.S. has launched airstrikes in Syria targeting an armed group backed by Iran. Our Jamie Pulper joins us live with the latest. Good morning, Jamie.
Yeah, good morning, Paul. And yes, this is the first military action under Joe Biden as U.S. president, ordering the airstrikes on a site in Syria near the border with Iraq, the site used by 2 Iranian-backed militia groups. This is retaliation for recent rocket attacks on U.S. troops in the region. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin tells us what went down.
We're confident in the target that we went after. We know what we did. And we're confident that that target was being used by the same Shia militia that conducted the strikes.
Now, the site struck is believed to have been used as part of a weapons smuggling operation by the militias. The Pentagon says it sends a message that President Biden will act to protect American coalition personnel, and it's believed a handful of militants were killed. We're reporting live. Jamie Pulper, 680 News.
6 City News Time 5:38. The head of Canada's largest pension fund has received a COVID-19 vaccine while on what he calls a very personal trip to Dubai.
Mark Machin disclosed the information in an internal memo. It came after the Wall Street Journal reported he flew to the United Arab Emirates earlier this month, where he received the first dose of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine and is awaiting the second. Machin said in an email viewed by the Canadian press that he remains in Dubai with his partner, quote, for many reasons, some of which are deeply personal. The federal government is actively discouraging Canadians from traveling abroad and recently implemented strict quarantine measures for those returning home. Jerry Smith, the Canadian press.
680 News Time, 5:38. You're with Toronto's only all-news radio, 680 News. Well, here's something that could make your 2021 a whole lot better. The Lotto Max jackpot for tonight's draw is $70 million, the largest jackpot possible. There are also an estimated 21 additional $1 million prizes up for grabs. You have until 10:30 tonight to buy your tickets.
But we know you're such a trooper. You'd still keep coming into work, wouldn't you?
Nice.
$70 million richer.
Nice knowing you.
Coming up in about 90 seconds, we're going to have traffic and weather together.
680 News Time, 5:39.
First, your disability insurer denies your long-term disability claim, and then your employer throws.
Depuis le mois d'octobre, justement, septembre.
Feud between Drake and Meek Mill.
Don't worry about upfront legal fees because there are none. At my law firm, we only get paid.
Il y avait une liste de 487 personnes.
And while you're...
Non, il fallait montrer l'exemple à elle et à nos femmes qui étaient encore des tests, mais ils l'ont dit à personne. Et donc il y avait justement cette ministre qui disait que non, il fallait montrer l'exemple. Elle a été vaccinée aussi. Même chose pour la ministre des Affaires étrangères qui, elle aussi, a quitté son poste. Alors le nouveau président, encore un, Francisco Sagasti lui-même, a exprimé son indignation et sa déception parce que bon, beaucoup de ces personnes-là, c'est parti de son gouvernement de transition qui doit mener bientôt aux élections en avril. Alors vous vous rendez compte que ça fait rebondir. Alors encore une fois, on se rend compte que ceux qui se battaient contre la corruption, finalement, sont aussi corrompus que les autres. Et donc, on ne voit pas la fin et les Péruviens sont très, très déçus de ça. Et la confiance envers les politiciens est à son plus bas. Alors, on se demande quel rôle ça va jouer pendant l'élection, mais c'est sûr que ça va en jouer un et ça peut donner des résultats tout à fait étonnants, voire bizarres.
On aura l'occasion d'y revenir certainement.
Oui.
Notre collègue du téléjournal, Jean-Michel Leprince. Merci, Jean-Michel.
De rien.
Et on vous en parlait hier en France, les autorités jugent la situation sanitaire préoccupante dans plusieurs départements français et on ne parle plus d'une dizaine de départements, mais d'une vingtaine. Et le variant ayant émergé d'abord au Royaume-Uni fait grimper le nombre de nouvelles contaminations dans la région parisienne et en Provence notamment. Je fais le point là-dessus avec notre correspondant en Europe, Yannick Dumont-Baron. Yannick, le variant britannique gagne donc de plus en plus de terrain en France.
Oui, effectivement, au pays, il représente environ la moitié des 22-25 000 nouvelles contaminations chaque jour. Ça croît.
Ontario. Next traffic report at 5:51 with the forecast. Jill Taylor.
It's Friday. We'll have lots of sunshine, just a beautiful day overall, and milder air working in too. It's a little on the chilly side right now. If you're just heading out, dress for a wind chill -6 to -12, but we'll climb to a guaranteed high of 4 degrees and just a light wind for the most part with that sunshine. Just gorgeous. Hopefully you could enjoy some outdoor time today. Clear through the evening, and then we get into that rain and snow overnight. Should be mainly rain for Toronto and the West End. To the north and east, though, there could be some slushy accumulation, but it should all end by about 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. And then sun and clouds Saturday, 7. More showers for Sunday and 7 degrees. Right now it's -7, clear at Pearson, -3 at 680 News. Today's guaranteed high, +4.
680 News Time, 5:43.
Now, the Dynamic Funds Market Minute.
Over to Mike Apple at the 680 Business Center. Morning, Mike.
Hey, morning, Paul. Good morning, Catherine. Markets are down again this morning after a bit of a sell-off yesterday. It was a quite substantial pullback. When you look at the numbers, the Dow was down 559 points. The NASDAQ down 3.5%. It was one of the worst days of 2021 so far. And the overseas markets are basically following Wall Street's lead from yesterday, and then we'll see what the U.S. markets do at the start of trade this morning, and we'll get an indication with the stock futures here over the next few hours. Right now, they're kind of holding at break even. The price for oil down 58 cents to $62.95. Gold is down $11 at $1,764. Tech stocks were by far the hardest hit in the Thursday trade, but then we also saw companies like Boeing reverse course after a big gain on Wednesday of 8%. It was down 5% yesterday. Price for the Canadian dollar after coming very close to 80 cents U.S. in Thursday's trade. The loonie this morning at 79.17 cents U.S. At the Business Center, I'm Mike Up.
Still to come on 680 News.
Pressure is on Nick Jonas to keep a new Saturday Night Live tradition going, started by Dan Levy.
680 News Time, 5:44.
It's hard to get things done when your living room is the classroom, home office, and canine concert hall.
Créer entre ceux qui seront vaccinés et les jeunes qui ne seront pas tout de suite. Là-dessus, vous il y a encore bien des discussions sur la table.
Notre correspondant en Europe, Yannick Dumont-Baron, à Paris. Merci Yannick.
Bonne soirée.
On revient chez nous. C'était jour de budget en Alberta. On savait, on en parlait hier, que la situation budgétaire et économique est particulièrement difficile dans cette province à cause de la pandémie, de la crise pétrolière aussi. Notre correspondant dans l'Ouest, Mathieu Goyer, est à Edmonton où il a suivi pour nous la présentation de ce budget. Mathieu, le gouvernement Kenney ne sait plus désormais à quel moment il va pouvoir revenir à l'équilibre budgétaire.
Et ça, Jean-Sébastien, c'est du jamais vu, de voir le gouvernement albertain ne pas savoir quand ou comment il va pouvoir revenir à des budgets équilibrés. On n'a pas l'habitude du tout à ça ici en Alberta, même si les dernières années ont été difficiles. Pour les grandes lignes du budget, 62 milliards de dollars de dépenses, un déficit, lui, de 18,2 milliards de dollars. Ça fait grimper la dette provinciale à un peu plus de 115 milliards de dollars. Il n'y a pas si longtemps que ça, il n'y en avait pas de dette provinciale ici en Alberta. C'est vrai, la pandémie de COVID-19 a tout changé. À elle seule, les mesures, les dépenses qui sont liées à la COVID approchent les 3 milliards de dollars. De tous les postes budgétaires ici dans la province, il y en a un qui est bonifié, c'est celui de la santé, vous l'aurez deviné. 4% d'augmentation des dépenses en santé pour la prochaine année. Il y aura toutefois des économies qui vont être trouvées ailleurs, 800 millions de dollars qui vont notamment être trouvés dans des compressions par attrition dans la fonction publique. C'est beaucoup l'éducation qui est décrit comme le grand perdant de ce budget, 175 millions de dollars de moins pour les universités albertaines. En présentant son budget, le ministre des Finances, Trippz, insistait sur deux choses, l'importance des investissements en santé et de la relance économique. Il faut aussi le rappeler, on y reviendra, mais ce budget ne prévoit aucune hausse d'impôts ou encore la création d'une taxe de vente provinciale. On écoute rapidement le ministre Trippz et je vous traduis son propos.
Right now is not a time to even be considering major revenue adjustments or tax increases.
Alors, essentiellement, ce que dit le ministre des Finances de l'Alberta, c'est qu'une augmentation des impôts et des taxes ralentirait la croissance et que ce n'est pas du tout la solution à prendre selon lui en ce moment.
Le gouvernement albertain ne veut pas se fier non plus sur une remontée du prix du pétrole pour améliorer ses finances publiques.
Le gouvernement Jason Kenney veut s'en tenir, Jean-Sébastien, à des projections conservatrices. On prévoit que le prix moyen durant la prochaine année du baril de pétrole se tiendra à 46 $ américains. On est bien loin du 58 $ américains qu'on prévoyait l'année dernière. C'est un changement de philosophie parce que le gouvernement albertain, cette année, il va même avec des projections qui sont plus conservatrices que celles du secteur privé lorsqu'on prévoit le prix du baril de pétrole toujours. D'ailleurs, encore cette année, les redevances du secteur énergétique sont en baisse, un peu moins de 3 milliards de dollars. C'est la moitié de ce qu'on allait chercher l'an dernier avec notamment le pétrole et le gaz naturel. Encore une fois, on écoute le ministre des Finances, Trippz.
And the reality is there's an awful lot of uncertainty yet. And in an environment such as this, I believe it's important.
Alors, le ministre des Finances dit qu'il y a trop d'incertitudes autour du prix du baril de pétrole, autour du marché énergétique, pour qu'on puisse vraiment s'appuyer sur le pétrole en faisant nos projections budgétaires. C'est pourquoi, donc, le gouvernement Bertin s'en tient à des projections très conservatrices.
Alors, les choix les plus difficiles sont repoussés à plus tard.
Oui, parce que je le disais, on ne sait pas quand ni comment le gouvernement Bertin va pouvoir revenir à l'équilibre budgétaire. Pour vous donner une idée de la crise à laquelle fait face la province, il faudra attendre à 2024 pour revenir à un PIB au niveau de 2013. C'est dire à quel point l'Alberta se trouve dans un trou financier profond. Il y a le doyen de la faculté d'administration ici, de l'Université d'Alberta, Joseph Doucet, qui parle d'un déficit qui est structurel et d'un important débat à venir. On peut le dire.
Il faut reconnaître qu'il faut payer pour ces services-là et nous ne sommes plus dans une situation qui est durable compte tenu de la baisse et de la volatilité de revenus associés aux ressources naturelles. Donc, il faut revoir l'aspect fiscal.
Alors, des débats très, très difficiles qui s'en viennent ici en Alberta dans les prochaines années.
Merci beaucoup, Mathieu.
Au revoir.
Mathieu Goyer, Edmonton.
C'était l'année des extrêmes et des contrastes.
Au Québec, la Caisse de dépôt et placement a conclu l'année 2020 avec un rendement de 7,7 %, ce qui est inférieur à son indice de référence. Charles Lemont, qu'on vient d'entendre, qui en était à sa première année à la direction de l'institution, a fait ce matin le bilan de cette année bien particulière pour l'institution. J'en discute avec notre journaliste à l'économie, Mathieu Dion. Mathieu, les contre-coups de la pandémie ont fait mal au portefeuille immobilier de la Caisse, notamment.
Une chute de 15,6 %. C'est principalement attribuable aux centres commerciaux et immeubles à bureaux que possède sa filiale Ivanhoe Cambridge et qui ont été durement touchés et frappés par les mesures de confinement. Il y a également le portefeuille des infrastructures qui a souffert dans le volet transport. On pense aux aéroports notamment. Voici le prix Charles Lemont en entrevue avec notre collègue Gérald Philippe.
Ivanhoe Cambridge, il faut revenir à l'origine, c'était quand même un opérateur de centres commerciaux. C'était sa genèse. Est-ce qu'on était frappé plus que nos autres, que des pairs, les autres fonds de pension? Pas au niveau des centres commerciaux. Mais la réalité, c'est qu'on en a plus. Alors, c'est à ce moment-là qu'il faut revoir probablement cette balance-là, le pourcentage que les centres commerciaux représentent. Est-ce qu'on aurait peut-être pu réduire plus rapidement? Possiblement. Néanmoins, on a des bonnes propriétés, des bonnes localisations. On peut redévelopper ces sites-là, pas nécessairement tout le temps les vendre. Alors, on s'y attaque.
Il y a donc une transition en cours dans le portefeuille immobilier. On compte 70 transactions en 2020, 6 milliards d'acquisitions et d'investissements et près de 3 milliards de cessions. Ivanhoe Cambridge va se tourner dorénavant davantage vers des créneaux porteurs, comme les secteurs industriels, logistiques et industriels.
Parlez-nous justement des autres portefeuilles dans ce bilan de l'année.
Eh bien, malgré les taux d'intérêt, le rendement des revenus fixes a atteint 9 % quand même. Les placements privés, entre autres dans les technologies et les soins de santé, ont affiché une performance de 20,7 %. En actions d'entreprise, 8,3 %, bien en deçà de certains indices comme le S&P 500 qui a gagné 18 % au même moment. C'est que la surexposition des actions canadiennes, comme les pétrolières, combinée à la sous-exposition au titre de grandes entreprises technologiques, est en cause.
Est-ce que la Caisse entend revoir son portefeuille de marché boursier?
Avec beaucoup de retard, je dirais. En tout cas, elle laisse entendre qu'elle corrige le tir depuis quelques temps déjà. Il y a le quotidien La Presse qui rapportait récemment qu'elle avait acheté ses premières actions, 200 millions de dollars dans Shopify, un fournisseur canadien de services pour le commerce en ligne et la plus grande capitalisation à la bourse de Toronto. À nouveau, Charles Lemont.
Moi, je pense qu'il y a matière à s'améliorer de ce côté-là. C'est une question de dosage. On ne change pas notre philosophie d'investissement. On reste des investisseurs à long terme. On en focus sur des entreprises, je dirais plus de qualité, style, valeur. Je pense qu'on peut avoir une exposition additionnelle, complémentaire, et tout ça s'équilibre un peu avec une exposition au style de croissance. Il faut comprendre aussi que la Caisse, on a une exposition portefeuille du marché canadien davantage que plusieurs autres pairs dans le monde. Et en soi, la bourse canadienne a fait seulement 5 % cette année.
Et c'est à se demander si finalement la Caisse a manqué le bateau en quelque sorte. Sur le sujet, l'ancien premier vice-président de la Caisse aux investissements privés, Daniel Payet, qui ajoute ceci.
Une chanson ne fait pas le printemps, ou une hirondelle, mais un titre particulier, si la Caisse de dépôt s'appuyait trop lourdement sur un titre particulier ou un secteur industriel particulier, je vous dirais que ce serait dangereux. Parce que la Caisse, il faut la comparer avec du très long terme. La durée de vie des déposants On aura besoin de la caisse encore dans 50 ans.
L'actif net du bas de laine des Québécois totalise désormais 365,5 milliards de dollars, une hausse de plus de 117 milliards sur 5 ans.
Notre journaliste à l'économie, Mathieu Dion. Merci beaucoup, Mathieu.
Merci, au revoir.
Aujourd'hui, sur les marchés.
Les grands indices étaient à la baisse. L'inflation est une source d'inquiétude.
Meaner than a drunk dog.
Legal gambler, and he like his fancy clothes, and he like to wear his diamond rings on everybody's nose. He got a custom Continental, he got a Eldorado too. He got a 32 gun in his pocket for fun. He got a razor in his shoe. He fair, and he runs around, and he's downtown, and it's all downtown. We're Friday, that a big he runs shooting dice, and at the edge of the bar sat a girl named Laura, and that girl looked nice. When he came to his eyes upon her, in trouble, so he down. He runs around and he fight for the jello man. He's there, and he runs around. Man is man in the whole downtown. Man is that old King Kong. Man is downtown. Well, up to men took to fighting. They went to pull down from the floor. Leroy looked like a jigsaw puzzle with a couple of pieces gone. Man, Leroy Brown, man is man in the whole downtown. Man is that old King Kong. Meaner than a junkyard dog. Man, Leroy Brown, man is man in the whole downtown. Man is that old King Kong. Meaner than a junkyard dog. He will battle that old King Kong. Meaner than a junkyard dog.
The original greatest hits, Super Radio.
The moment I wake up, before I put on my makeup, I say
NorthwoodMortgage.com, license 10349. 680 News Time, 556.
Now the 680 News Business Report. Here is Mike Apple.
Morning, Catherine. We saw international markets follow the lead of Wall Street sell-off that the stocks experienced Thursday stateside. This morning, the Tokyo Nikkei closed out the week with the Japanese benchmark down by 4%, and the Hong Kong Hang Seng was down 3.5%. International markets in the Eurozone a little less to the downside, but still negative. The Frankfurt DAX index is currently down 1/3%. The U.S. markets coming off one of the worst days so far for 2021, as the tech sector took a nosedive with reaction to rising bond yields, the economic expectations sending borrowing costs in the bond market, or U.S. Treasuries, to highest level in about a year's time, and that was a sell signal to some. So the Dow was down 559, the NASDAQ down 478, which worked out to 3.5%. The TSX coming off a loss of 260 points, or 1.4%. Shares of Beyond Meat have been all over the map in early trading activity. And late last night, actually, after the close of trade, Beyond Meat issued their quarterly earnings. The sales came in below forecast in the latest quarter.
You don't say.
As much as 11%, but then the fake meat company released another statement, said it's got new partnerships with Yum Brands, which is the operator of KFC, and also McDonald's. And Beyond Meat shares, after an initial sell-off, turned higher, right now up by 4% in pre-market action. So will it be $800 or maybe $10 per share for GameStop? The options trade making the rounds on Reddit chat boards had shares of GameStop, some thinking they're going to go up substantially today. Others think the company is worth just $10 a share. Yesterday, GameStop surged by as much as 80% at one point, and then really cooled off late in the day. This morning, up by about 7% in pre-market action. Canadian dollar coming off a 3-year high reached Thursday, cooled off a little bit late in the day yesterday, down another quarter cent this morning at 79.07. At the Business Center, I'm Mike Apple.
This is Bernie HomeSafe. Did you know electrical hazards are a leading cause of fires in homes? Bernie HomeSafe's highly trained electricians can identify electrical hazards before they become an emergency. If there's smoke in your home, you hear this. If there's an electrical wiring hazard, the next sound you might hear is this. 911, what is your emergency? Get a Bernie HomeSafe electrical inspection today and make sure your home and family are safe. Book your no-charge assessment at ismyhomesafe.ca. COVID-19 protocols in place.
Some terrific things start with a T. Like Thornhill Toyota, a timeless dealership built on trust. A team
hold out there on both in-town routes as well as
Ici Sophia André-Blondin. Les chèvres laitières défient la loi du moindre effort. À choisir être peut-être relever un défi pour obtenir de la nourriture.
Les années-lumière, dimanche midi, maritime 13h.
What? We're getting food.
Vous écoutez ici Radio-Canada Première. Vous écoutez ici Radio-Canada Première. Au 860 AM à Toronto. Du cœur aux idées.
Ce matin, au Radio Journal, petite bouffée d'air frais pour la relâche.
Je vais retourner au cinéma avec plaisir. Je suis vraiment content que ça se passe.
Moi, je suis prête à retourner avec la distanciation.
Les cinémas, les piscines et les arénas rouvrent leurs portes. Mais le retour de la relâche sera difficile pour les élèves primaires.
On pense que le bénéfice de
The outdoor patios could be ready to open.
Be the only factor considered when deciding who should be vaccinated first. The report says by including people living in the hardest hit postal codes, the impact would be much bigger and result in fewer cases and hospitalizations and ultimately deaths. Cases have been notably higher in the northwest corner of the city, some areas of Peel region, Scarborough and York region, where there are larger concentrations of essential workers who are more than likely to be lower income or racialized. It's in these areas, those in the early 50s, have seen higher fatality rates than those over 80 in other areas where cases aren't so high. The table says using both age and postal code to determine order of vaccination would be more equitable. Any changes to the plan would have to be approved by Cabinet. Tina Trajani, Global News.
So while we sit and wait for some sort of plan for a vaccine rollout in this country, it appears those with the means to do so are finding ways to take care of themselves. A man who heads up Canada's largest pension fund has taken a trip to Dubai, one that he calls very personal. But while he's there, he's managed to get a COVID-19 vaccination, sent an email to staff at CPP Investments and told them he's still there with his partner, but has followed all travel protocol. The government, meanwhile, has been telling Canadians to avoid all non-essential travel for weeks. A group representing Ontario's 21 universities says the sector is facing a shortfall of about $500 million this year as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. The Council of Ontario Universities says schools incurred significant expenses in the switch to remote learning, implementing enhanced health and safety measures, and in providing personal protective equipment. At the same time, it says revenues from residences facility for combined loss of roughly $1 billion for the school year. The organization, though, says institutions made cuts and savings to bring that number down by about half. They're now asking for sector-wide support from the province to help make up the difference. This has been a problem throughout the pandemic, but as it drags on, it only seems to get worse. And once again, the Public Health Agency of Canada is warning about so-called infodemic. That's a spread of disinformation that they say is undermining the response to the pandemic. You only have to look as far as your Uncle Al's posts on Facebook. Believe it or not, the Ontario Medical Association says there's about 105,000 Uncle Al's in Ontario. Discussing the pandemic online is a hoax.
Dr. Joy Hatley, a family physician in Kingston, Ontario, is seeing more and more patients who believe COVID-19 is a hoax.
It's now affecting my ability to care for my patients because there's a trust factor and there's an uncertainty on their part.
Even her own father was sharing videos containing widely debunked claims, such as Bill Gates secretly inserting trackable microchips into the vaccines.
So I went back to my dad and I said, Dad, I'm worried about you. Like, that's just nuts.
Experts warn the pandemic has produced a perfect storm for conspiracies to fester, fear, isolation, and more time spent online, threatening to undermine the pandemic response. Jeff Semple, Global News, Toronto.
There's a growing GoFundMe campaign for the nanny who many are calling a hero. More than $54,000 has already been raised for the Filipina nanny who is a single mom herself, but saved 2 children, pushing them out of the way when an SUV jumped the curb and slammed into her in Toronto. It happened near St. Clair and Dufferin on Wednesday. She was pushing the 2 kids in a stroller, just 2 and 3 years old, when the SUV backed up with enough force to jump the curb. When she pushed the stroller to save the kids, the SUV pinned her against a storefront. The mother of the children spoke with Global News.
Every mother's worst nightmare to hear something like that. She's the utmost loving and caring nanny and caregiver, and I know that she would have done everything in her power to protect them. Just wanted her to feel that we are for her and we will support her through this.
The nanny, Jillian Mendoza, has already undergone 3 surgeries after being taken to hospital with head trauma and broken bones. We have the link to the GoFundMe page up on our website. Taking a look at sports, the Edmonton Oilers are starting to pick up steam, winning their 5th in a row last night, beating Vancouver 3-0. As a matter of fact, the Oilers only trailed Toronto in the North Division, only lost twice in their last 13 games. Other games, new coach, same result for the Montreal Canadiens, Winnipeg.
Here in the beach, it's 2 words that brighten up Brian's Friday, patio season.
Yeah, I know that is so nice, and I know everyone loves it and is longing for it for sure, yeah.
Just being able to go and sit and actually see your friends in person instead of on a video call.
Oh, yeah, that sure would be nice.
Now, the city says it's made improvements to this year's KPT program to make it easier for restaurant and bar owners to apply and faster for them to get approval for the permits.
It's less likely they're going to get inspected to follow rules, right?
Reporting live at the beach, Carl Heskey, 680 News.
680 News Time 6:05. Spring-like conditions as we head into the final weekend of February. 680's Laura Carney is on the weather watch. Some nice weather to end February. It all starts today with sunshine and a 680 News guaranteed high of 4 degrees. Fun fact, on this day last year, we had record snowfall of 11.4 centimeters. For the final weekend of February, our meteorologist Jim Taylor says both days will be mild, but if you're looking to get outside, Saturday is your day.
We've got the rain ending around 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, and then we'll get into some sun and cloud and up to 7 degrees. And then Sunday could end up being a rather wet day, but still quite mild, 7 degrees.
So will March come in like a lion? Jill says it's looking like it for Monday, March 1st. Jill says we can expect strong winds and temperatures falling to -5. Today's guaranteed high.
Wait, that's not what that means. Hey,
680 News Time, 6:06. The U.S. military's carried out an airstrike targeting Iran-backed militias in Syria. Our Jamie Pulford joins us live with the first military action ordered by the Biden White House. Jamie.
Yeah, that's right, Paul. The airstrike targeted facilities belonging to a powerful Iranian-backed Iran militia group. The Pentagon says it's retaliation for a rocket attack in Iraq earlier this month that killed 1 civilian contractor and wounded a U.S. service member and other coalition troops. We get more details from CNN's Oren Lieberman.
A U.S. aircraft targeted 1 target with multiple sites on that target used by Iranian-backed Shia militias for weapons smuggling.
Now, shortly after the airstrikes were carried out, the U.S. Defense Secretary says he is confident in the target we went after. We know what we hit. This is the first military move from Joe Biden since becoming U.S. president, 36 days after being sworn in. Officials say this demonstrates a will to defend U.S. troops in Iraq. Reporting live, Jamie Pulford, 680 News.
680 News Time 6:07. A cab driver is recovering in hospital. 2 men have been taken into custody following a stabbing and robbery in Mississauga. Peel police say it happened in the area of Hurontario and Dundas just after 9 last night. The cab driver was stabbed in the chest and taken to hospital with not life-threatening injuries. The suspects ran away but were later taken into custody. The investigation continues.
680 News Time 6:08. NBA Commissioner Adam Silver has publicly expressed regret for statements he made in the aftermath of Masai Ujiri's run-in with a deputy sheriff after the Raptors championship in 2019. Our Simon Bennett has more.
Take you back to October 2019, months after the incident involving Ujiri in Golden State. This was on HBO with Adam Silver.
Lessons learned for him without assigning culpability or blame to anyone. As a leader, those are the kinds of situations he needs to learn to avoid.
This was long before body cam footage was released revealing that Ujiri was far from the aggressor. Silver conducted a phone interview with Sportsnet's Michael Grange and said, quote, "When I watched that last bit of the interview, in light of what we now know, I would love to take those words back." He went on to say,
That's telling me, please don't fight. Please don't fight. I don't know what you're talking about.
Look at that now. I cringe when I watch it. This was back in the news recently after Alan Strickland, the deputy sheriff in question, dropped his lawsuit with Ujiri over the incident. I'm Simon Bennett.
This is 680 News. The city's Illuminato Festival says it will be going ahead this year with a series of video and digital experiences. The International Festival of Arts.
Yeah, we'll be talking to Bonnie Crombie later this morning, the mayor of Mississauga. She had a news conference earlier this week where she talked about reopening. She's a strong advocate for Mississauga to be put into the red zone. She said during the news conference, "I'm so proud of what we've accomplished. We can't risk what we've achieved." The usual stuff. Let's continue to do the same things that got us here. Let's remain vigilant so the numbers can go down even further. When asked about the matter, well, Dr. Lawrence Lowe says he really doesn't have a specific position right now on all of this. The current order is supposed to expire on March the 8th. As business becomes more and more frustrated, one Toronto small business has put its frustrations right on the front window.